Back then, I was still a college student, delivering pizzas to make ends meet. Most nights were the same routine, except that one. It was the kind of night that still keeps me up. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I got an order for a house on the outskirts of town. The place was isolated and old, with overgrown grass and dim lights barely glowing through the curtains. Something about it felt wrong from the moment I pulled into the driveway. I walked up, pizza in hand, and knocked. A man answered, looking disheveled. Might be in his mid-40s, dark circles hounded under his eyes.
Pizza delivery,
I said, trying to sound upbeat. He looked confused. You sure you got the right place? I didn't order any pizza.
This is 1489 Oakride, right?
I asked, double-checking the slip. He hesitated. Yeah, that's my address, but no one here ordered anything. Thinking I might have screwed up, I asked if he could check with the others in the house. He turned and called back. Babe, did you order a pizza? A woman's voice responded from further inside, followed by two toddlers poking their heads around the corner. They all exchanged confused looks. No one had ordered anything. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number listed on the order. After a few rings, a raspy voice answered. Yeah, that's the right address.
They're saying no one here ordered pizza. Are you sure?
The voice on the other end chuckled, low and eerie. I'm in the shed at the bottom of the driveway. Bring it here. I froze, my heart skipping a beat.
The shed?
The man at the door overheard me and looked pale, his eyes wide with sudden realization. We don't have anyone staying in the shed, he said, his voice shaky. The woman came to the door, clutching a robe tightly around herself.
What's going on, honey?
I repeated what I'd heard, and the air around us seemed to turn heavy. The man grabbed a flashlight from inside, ignoring his wife's protests. I'll check it out, he muttered, clearly unnerved. I followed him down the driveway. My feet were heavy as a sick feeling twisted in my gut. The shed at the end was barely visible in the dim light. Rotting wood, broken windows, a loose padlock hanging from the door. Every step closer made my skin crawl. The man aimed his flashlight at the door and pulled it open. The hinges let out a slow, eerie creak. The smell hit us first, damp, moldy, with a foul undertone. His flashlight flickered across the inside. There, in the corner, was a dirty mattress, surrounded by crumpled blankets, old food wrappers, and empty cans. The walls were covered in scratches. Words.
I see you. I hear you. I watch you.
My stomach churned. Someone had been living here, right under their noses, watching them. For how long? Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. The same number. My hand shook as I answered.
Hello?
The voice was clearer now, calm and cold. You should have left the pizza at the door. Then, from inside the house, we heard it. A loud crash, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. My heart dropped. We ran back to the house. The woman was at the door, frozen, pale as a sheet.
Someone's inside,
she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man, still holding the flashlight, grabbed a kitchen knife and entered the house, his steps cautious. I followed, my pulse raced. The lights flickered as we stepped into the living room, and there, standing in the corner, was a figure, a filthy man with wild eyes and a twisted grin, holding a crowbar. He didn't belong here, yet he was, standing among their family's belongings like he'd been waiting for this chance all his life. I told you, Julian, I'd always be there, waiting for you. He stared directly at Julian as if trying to make a point. Before I could react, the man with the knife lunged at him. The intruder swung the crowbar, catching him on the arm. The sound of bone hitting metal echoed through the room. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a lamp, and smashed it over the intruder's head. He staggered, then collapsed, unconscious. Panting, I backed away, shaking, the broken lamp still in my hands. The family stood frozen. Julian clutched her children tightly and sobbed. The man called the police, his hand trembling as he relayed the details. The hobo was an obsessed ex-lover and couldn't let go, even after Julian had moved on years ago. They dragged the psychopath out, but as they shoved him into the back of the squad car, he turned and smiled. "I can never let you go," he promised, just loud enough for me to hear. I never delivered to that neighborhood again. It's funny how a single moment can change everything. One message, one night, one choice. I should have known something was wrong that day, but how do you see the monster inside your friend? I used to think Max was just like the rest of us, normal, until that night. I'd known Max since middle school. We weren't best friends or anything, but we ran in the same group. Jimmy and I, though, we were close. We always hung out after school, talking about random stuff. Girls, nothing serious. But Max? Lately, something about him seemed off. It started small, little things. Max got weirdly quiet whenever Jimmy was around. I thought maybe he was just dealing with stuff, like teenage drama. I didn't think much of it at first. I was playing GTA 5 on my PS4. That's when my phone buzzed. When I got that message, I didn't think twice. Max and Jimmy had been my friends for years. We had our moments, but this? This was just another random night out, hanging out, joking around, and maybe playing video games, so I thought. Max had always been a little different, more intense, but that's just Max, right? I met Jimmy and we started towards Max. Do you think Max is serious about some big surprise? Man, he's always full of it. Jimmy always joked. That's how he was. He'd laugh through anything, brush off any tension. But even he couldn't hide how weird things had gotten between Max and us lately. Looking back, I think Jimmy sensed something that I didn't, or didn't want to. "You guys finally made it. Ready for something you'll never forget?" I walked in and it was like a weight hit me. The air was heavy. Max didn't say much, and Jimmy, who was usually the life of the party, just sat there scrolling through his phone. It didn't feel like a hangout. It felt like something was about to go wrong. Jimmy was just trying to keep things normal, but Max, he barely said a word. I thought maybe something was going on between him and Jimmy, something about that girl, Alexa, but I didn't know the full story, not then. "Let's play a game. The game is I kill you." While saying this, he pointed the gun towards Jimmy. When I saw it, I froze. It was like time stopped. I remember thinking, this has to be a joke, right? It can't be real. But then, I saw Max's face. He wasn't messing around. Max's voice was off, distant, like he was somewhere else. And we didn't see it. I didn't see it. God, I didn't see it. You think it's funny, don't you? Always acting like you're better. I didn't catch it at first, the way Max's eyes changed when he said that, but it was like something snapped inside of him. "Max, what the hell, man? This isn't funny. What the hell are you talking about, man? Do you think you can take her from me?" It was like a nightmare, only real. Max shot him, just like that. There was no shouting, no argument, nothing. He just pulled the trigger. I was frozen. I wanted to believe it was a prank, that Jimmy would pop out of the water laughing, but he didn't. He couldn't. The room went silent. Jimmy, who was just laughing with us days ago, was now lying there, motionless. My brain couldn't process what had just happened. And then, Max did something even worse. He didn't flee, didn't panic. Instead, in a chilling and surreal act, he took out his phone, opened Snapchat, and snapped a picture of Jimmy's lifeless body. That's when I realized the Max I knew was gone. He was a stranger, a monster. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. but I did. At the trial, he didn't flinch, didn't even react when they played the video, the one he posted online for everyone to see, as if Jimmy's life was just entertainment. Jimmy's gone, Max is gone, and here I am, left with nothing but memories and nightmares. Every time I hear a Snapchat notification, I feel sick. I can't erase what I saw. I can't unsee what Max became. You think you know your friends. You think you can trust them. But sometimes, the real monsters are standing right beside you, waiting for the right moment to strike. The story was inspired by a horrific incident that happened in February 2015. 16-year-old Maxwell Morton shot and killed his friend Jimmy Patrick in a small Pennsylvania town. The two teens were reportedly friends, but tensions rose due to jealousy, especially over a girl. On the night of the crime, Maxwell invited Jimmy over under pretenses. Once Jimmy arrived, Maxwell shot him in the head. Disturbingly, after committing the murder, Morton took a selfie with Jimmy's lifeless body and sent it to friends via Snapchat. A shocked recipient saved the photo and reported it to the authorities, leading to Maxwell's arrest. He was later convicted of third-degree murder and was charged accordingly. It was 6 p.m. and I was with my friend Abby. We were both waiting. It felt strange, two young girls alone in Riley Park. The sun was setting and he still hadn't arrived. Mr. Jake was a very pleasant, kind, and caring man. He was a man of faith, or so he always said, and he regularly sent me money to buy things. He spoiled me a lot, and that's something not many men do. He hated young men, always thought they were self-centered and never kind. Mr. Jake was something every lady should have, and I was really thrilled. He had never asked me to go out since we started talking on Snapchat. Sure, he lived a bit far away, but he sent me money to go to a national park. I thought it would be a great opportunity. I dressed as pretty as I could, a cute dress, but not too flashy so my parents wouldn't notice. It was a secret. I left early and told them I was going to my friends. That's how I got to this moment.
Is he really going to come? He said so.
Soon, we heard the sound of a car driving up. It was an old car. I had no idea what model it was. Mr. Jake came out of the car, dressed in blue jeans, a blue jacket, and a cap. Mr. Jake was 45, and from the start, something about him made me feel uneasy. But both Abby and I decided to ignore that feeling. We're just being paranoid, I kept telling myself. He smiled at us sheepishly and said, "Let's go down the hill." We walked behind him through the trees, deeper and deeper into the forest. The further we went, the more distant the familiar paths seemed, and the mist began to envelop everything around us. The air was so still that even our breath seemed to bounce off the trees. The sun was setting and he didn't say a word. Where was that kindness, that warmth? I wondered if it was all in the chat. Worst of all, he hadn't explained why he'd invited me. Jake started to speak in a low voice, but his tone was different, almost threatening. He started saying strange things about how he knew the area and how other people used the park for rituals. People in this park perform rituals where they kill people and eat them. My heart began to race.
What kind of joke is this?
I asked nervously, but he just looked at me with that smile that now seemed much more sinister. At that moment, everything changed. He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at us out of the corner of his eye, and that look, that emptiness, lifeless look, said, "They asked me to kill you guys for them." I had an overwhelming urge to run, but I was more afraid of what would happen if we did. My phone didn't even have a signal. Abby and I looked at each other in horror, realizing that we were too far from the park and there was no one around to help us. We tried to go back, but it was too late. He lunged at Abby, grabbing her arms and dragging her down to the floor. He was choking Abby with his bare hands. They were struggling on the floor. Abby's pupils rolled up. She was gasping for air. He took a knife out of his jacket pocket and stabbed on her throat rigorously. He had a rage on his face. This happened so quick that I didn't even have time to react. I was shocked and scared. He looked at me with evil in his eyes. That's when I came to my senses. I ran as fast as I could, only hearing the sound of his footsteps chasing me. I was writhing and screaming as he chased me. I felt as if it would catch me at any moment. The terror made me trip over roots, scraping my skin as the bushes tried to stop me. I was almost out, so close to getting away, but he caught me. He was very excited and said, "They'll be happy to have you." They? Who was he talking about? I wondered as I continued to shout, hoping someone would hear me. Suddenly, some people approached. I was relieved, but only for a few seconds, because one of them was carrying Abby on his shoulders. I only heard, "Don't kill the other one. What good is the sacrifice?" This situation got to me and I passed out. I didn't understand anything. When I woke up, I was tied in the middle of the forest. I was lying on a table, my hands tied, and they were all around me. There were so many men, and one of them was licking my legs. It was a cult that had massacred Abby's body. They were standing around me. I tried to get free, but I couldn't, and they stabbed me in the leg. I tried to scream, but I couldn't because my mouth was tied. They kept stabbing me in my legs and arms, and one of them took out a saw. The pain was unbearable. I felt myself losing consciousness, but then suddenly I experienced a moment of relief. The pain was gone. It was soothing. I thought I was dead, but I wasn't. They had cut off my legs and sewn me up. That would be my life from then on. The story was inspired by the real case involving a 24-year-old man who was arrested in Delphi, Indiana, after he took two 15-year-old girls into the woods after meeting them on Snapchat. The incident happened near the Monon High Bridge Trail, the site where Libby German and Abby Williams were murdered in 2017. Police received a call reporting the man who claimed he thought the girls were 19. When officers arrived, they found him smoking cannabis with the girls in a wooded area. As for the murder of Libby and Abby, they were found dead after a hike in February 2017. Libby had posted a photo on Snapchat, capturing images of a mysterious man nicknamed Bridge Guy, who became key to the investigation. Although a man called Richard Allen was arrested in 2022 and charged with the murders, his trial had been delayed until October 2024. His lawyers have put forward a theory of ritual sacrifice by a nationalist sect called the Odinists, further complicating the case. The sun was below the horizon, casting the afternoon shadow over the kitchen, where the roasted turkey aroma met freshly baked pie. I stirred a pot of gravy, standing and feeling my heart beat from anticipation. For me, Thanksgiving has always been a time for family, but it felt different this year. Unsaid tension hung in the air, and I could tell by the way my parents looked at each other, smiling tightly. My parents were bustling about, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. They were excited about their new life, their retirement plans, and how they would finally be free of me. I could feel it. Their excitement was a knife twisting my gut.
Joel, would you set the table?
My mother called from the dining room. I nodded, forcing a smile on my lips as I set the ladle down. My hands trembled slightly. I was on edge, and I didn't know why. Perhaps it was the weight of their impending announcement, the one that they had hinted at but never fully revealed. As I arranged the silverware, I overheard snippets of their conversation. "We can't keep supporting him." My father's voice was low but firm. "He needs to learn to stand on his own." My heart sank. I knew what they meant. They were finally cutting me off financially. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Dinner commenced with laughter and clinking glasses, but I felt detached from the warmth that enveloped the room. My parents chatted about retirement plans and dreams of travel. while I forced myself to join in, laughing when appropriate, nodding along. Inside, a storm brewed. As we moved to dessert, my mother's expression shifted.
Joel,
She began, hesitantly.
there's something we need to discuss.
My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment that would shatter everything. Not now, Lisa. My father interjected sharply. Let's enjoy this time together. But I could see it in their eyes, the fear of what lay ahead. I excused myself under the pretense of needing fresh air and stepped outside into the cool night. The stars twinkled above like distant eyes, watching my every move. My mind raced as I paced back and forth on the porch, thoughts spiraling into dark corners. When I returned inside, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. My parents were no longer smiling. Instead, they wore expressions of concern mixed with something else. Disappointment? Fear? It gnawed at me.
Joel,
My mother started again, her voice trembling slightly.
we've decided.
But before she could finish, something snapped inside of me. The years of feeling inadequate and dependent surged forward like a tidal wave. Enough! I shouted, startling them both. You think you can just abandon me after everything? Their faces paled as realization dawned on them. Their son was no longer just angry, he was dangerous. After dinner, while they cleaned up, I slipped away to my room. The shadows danced on the walls as I pulled out my notebook, the book of premeditation. Each page detailed my plan: get knives, sledgehammers, bleach, everything necessary to erase them from existence. As I returned to the kitchen, adrenaline coursed through my veins. My heart pounded like a war drum as I approached my father from behind. He was distracted, humming softly to himself as he washed dishes. "Dad?" I said softly. He turned, surprise flickering across his face just before it vanished into confusion. What's wrong? In one swift motion, I grabbed the knife from the counter and plunged it into his back. The world went silent. Time froze as he gasped in disbelief. "What are you doing?" He croaked, shock flooding his eyes. I pulled out the knife and struck again, 42 times in total, each thrust fueled by years of resentment, boiling over into pure rage. My mother entered just as I finished. Her scream pierced through the air like shattering glass.
Joel, no!
But it only fueled my frenzy. The world around me faded. All that mattered was silencing them forever. She fought back fiercely. Her love for him made her desperate to save her husband and herself. I was beyond control as chaos broke loose in the once happy home. The bodies collapsed to the floor like rag dolls, with no life left in them. At this point, it dawned on me that I had done like a wave of ice-cold water. I dragged their bodies into the bathroom where I had prepared everything. Plastic bins filled with corrosive chemicals awaited their remains, like hungry beasts ready to devour their prey. As I dismembered them piece by piece, a sense of relief washed over me. This was liberation. I left their remains dissolving in acid and retreated to my room, hoping to escape the horror of what I'd done. The house felt different now. It was mine alone. I glanced out the window at the world waking up outside. A smile crept across my face as I realized that no one would ever know what happened here. Not today or ever. Days passed before anyone noticed they were missing. Days filled with paranoia and guilt, gnawing at my insides like rats in a cage. When police finally arrived for a welfare check after my mother's co-workers reported her absence, panic surged through me. They found everything. The boiling pot on the stove still simmering with remnants of what used to be her head, body parts dissolving in acid, notes detailing every step of my plan, scattered across the floor like confetti at a twisted celebration. As they uncovered each horrifying detail, all I could think was how close I'd come to freedom, and how quickly it had unraveled into chaos. Thanksgiving will never be just another holiday for me again. It is now forever etched in blood, a reminder of what happens when love turns into horror. The story was inspired by a horrific incident that happened on November 26, 2016. Joel Jr., then 28 years old, was living off his parents' financial support when they decided to stop funding his lifestyle as they prepared for retirement. The couple had recently sold their home and were planning to move into a more budget-friendly residence. This decision prompted a violent reaction from their son, who felt entitled to their support and had a significant motive: a $500,000 life insurance policy that would pay out if both parents were dead. The murders occurred in their home in Tennessee, where Joel Jr. meticulously planned the horrific acts that followed. With dawn breaking and police arrived, he was later convicted and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was beautiful, handsome, breathtaking. Bill was the embodiment of everything I had always dreamed of, something far away from the place that had caused me so much pain. A tall man, blonde, with eyes as blue as the sky. I was completely captivated by his charisma and his promises of a bright future. He was a flirtatious, kind man, and he was fascinated that I came from a place as far away as Egypt. He helped me a lot in my career. I managed to grow and become known as the Great Omaima, the Pharaoh, with my exotic outfits and traditional style. It was Bill's idea. He said it would attract more attention. After every celebration, we always went out for burgers together. One of the things I loved about this country was how wild and free it was. Colorful parties, flamboyant people. I loved it all. I was living the American dream. Although Bill always told me he'd like to move to a simpler, more culturally rich place, I always joked with him, saying that was fine, but I'd only eat once a day. When we got married, everything was incredible. I was a famous woman, known as the Great Pharaoh, and I was a respected woman. I hated that title. I just wanted to serve my beloved, the one who had brought me here. One day, tired of being called that, I wanted something new. I contacted a great designer who made me a beautiful, innovative outfit made of fine fabrics and the latest fashions. I loved it, and I showed it to Bill. But do you know what he did? He started by laughing. But when he saw I was serious, he got angry and started shouting at me. I had never seen him like that before. He hated that I was wearing that outfit. He thought it was vulgar. When I insisted that it was revolutionary, he started hitting me, tore the outfit off me, and told me, naked, that this was the natural state I should be in, like a pharaoh, untouched by the world. I realized that Bill was obsessed with Egyptian culture. In time, I came to understand that what he wanted wasn't a wife, but a relic. Now, he forced me to wear traditional Egyptian clothes, yelled at me if he saw me in anything American, even at home, and scolded me for any attempt to assimilate into my new home. He didn't even know the real culture, only what had been shown to him thousands of years ago. He wanted me to be more Egyptian than ever, and any deviation was met with shouting, or worse. I wanted a distraction. We were always invited to parties, but he refused to go. But with Thanksgiving coming up, I wanted to have a party and invite my friends and Bill's colleagues. I didn't think he'd mind. I started organizing everything in secret. I knew he would be upset when he found out, but I preferred it to be in front of his friends so he could drink with them and be distracted. I didn't care if he beat me afterwards. I was determined to take control of my life. I bought everything to make several special and traditional dishes. The turkey, salads, side dishes, everything. I wanted it to be perfect, but I was too obvious. When he arrived, he could see the dishes laid out, the big table, and the smell in the kitchen. His face showed a deep connection to his childhood, a familiar smell and a date he clearly recognized. Do you know why the smell took him back to his childhood? Well, those wide open eyes, his sunken eye sockets, and his receding hairline were more noticeable than ever, with pronounced bald spots and those wrinkles. I'd never seen him like this before. He asked me what I was doing, and full of fear, I tried to tell him that it was just a small event. But he exploded. He came over and hit my head hard against the kitchen counter. I saw the blood gushing out. He had never gone that far before. He hit me several times. He kicked me in the stomach, and when I fell to the floor, he continued to punch me in the face and stomach. Then he whipped me with his belt while I screamed for him to stop, begging him not to hurt me. Finally, he grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and said something I will never forget.
"You'll never be an American. You'll always be a foreigner."
Anger and fear clouded my mind. I grabbed the nearest knife, and before I knew it, I was stabbing him in the chest. Once, twice, until his body stopped moving. It was an instinctive act. When I realized the floor was covered in blood and I was on my knees. A little later, I put on makeup and slipped into a dress I had bought for the occasion. A comfortable, long, simple dress. I felt so good, so free. The guests arrived one by one, and everyone was so impressed. They had never seen me like this before, and they all complimented me on being so brave and trying different things. I felt amazing as I served everyone and brought out the silver trays, closed to keep the food warm. Everything was perfect. The side dishes, the cutlery. I paid attention to the smallest details, and finally, the main course. Everyone served themselves and enjoyed what I had prepared. I had never tried cooking American food before, but they all praised me. The salad, the mashed potatoes, the fine wine, the turkey, and the meat. Everything was delicious. While everyone was enjoying themselves, I decided to say a few words.
I know this is usually done before, but I didn't know it was my first time.
I said. Everyone laughed.
Bill hated this party. Hated what it stood for.
Everyone laughed because they knew it was true. He hated everything about it. Then I revealed what was hidden under the sealed centerpiece tray.
Oh, my dear Bill. Now you're truly one with the traditions.
I said as I unveiled his head hanging in the center of the table, the guests having already consumed part of him.
Now Bill is inside all of you. And I think this way, you'll finally understand the importance of traditions.
Everyone began to scream in terror, terrified and running as fast as they could. It was a scene of panic, but I didn't care because I felt euphoric, so happy and so free. This story is based on the true case. In 1991, Omaima Nelson, a 23-year-old Egyptian model, brutally murdered her 56-year-old husband, Bill Nelson, at their home in Costa Mesa, California, on Thanksgiving Day. Omaima stabbed him repeatedly and then beat him to death with a clothes iron. After his death, she dismembered his body, cooked parts of it, and allegedly ate his ribs with barbecue sauce. Omaima claims she killed him in self-defense, alleging years of physical and sexual abuse by Bill, who she said raped her on the morning of the murder. But prosecutors argued that Omaima was a con artist who used sex to manipulate and steal from men. After a disturbing trial that included testimony about cannibalism, she was convicted of second-degree murder in 1993 and sentenced to 27 years in prison. Although Omaima denied eating her husband, her actions in the trial captured public attention, with comparisons drawn to popular cultural figures such as Hannibal Lecter. I have always loved the calm one gets from fishing alone, so when I decided to spend a weekend by Pine Lake, I was psyched. I packed all my gear and drove for hours until finally setting up camp in a secluded spot by the water. The sun had set. I cast my line as it painted the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink, ready for a perfect night of relaxation. Darkness closed around me, so familiar that it felt like breathing, crickets chirping and the rustle of leaves moving in the wind. I sat there lost in thought, waiting for a bite when I heard crunching through the brush. Footsteps. I turned, jerking my head towards the sound, and saw a man step out from behind the trees.
"Mind if I join you?"
he asked, his voice warm but with a certain awkward edge. "Oh yeah?" I said, trying to make myself sound nonchalant. I didn't think anyone else was out here.
"Most people avoid this lake,"
he said, sitting down about a few feet from me. He looked rugged, 50-ish or so, with a scruffy beard and a worn flannel shirt.
Name's Dave.
Ethan, I said, feeling a small shiver of discomfort rise up in me. We talked as we fished, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Dave was watching me, his eyes flicking back toward the tree line more often than not. What are you looking for? I finally asked, trying to sound lighthearted.
Oh, just keeping an eye out. You'd be surprised what lurks in these woods,
he said, his tone suddenly serious. What do you mean? I asked, my belly nodding up. Dave leans in.
You know, things happen out here,
he says.
People just disappear.
My heart thumps a little faster. Like who?
Joe McAllister,
he says.
He went out one night to fish and never came home. Not a sign of him, just his gear.
He looks at me with a narrowed eye.
You're out here alone, Ethan. You sure that's smart?
Look, I'm just trying to enjoy some time away from everything. I'm fine, I said, trying to sound convincing, but his words bit into me.
Fine? Or just lucky so far?
His smile didn't quite reach his eyes.
The lake doesn't give peace. It takes.
That was it for me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I think I'm gonna head back now. Not yet, he kept insisting. Listen to what I'm saying. The lake is alive. It knows you are here. I made an attempt to brush it off, but the air started to thicken with tension. Actually, I need to go. Suit yourself, he shrugged. But remember, it is not the fish you should fear. Pushing the crawling feeling in my stomach aside, I repacked my belongings and continued leaving. Woods were darker, reaching out with shadow, as if unsettling me further with every step that took me away from Dave and his creepy, unsettling aura. I reached for my truck keys and ran for my truck. My heart was pounding. I glanced back once more, and there he was, standing across the lake once more, his unsettling smile plastered on his face. I tore out there, my pulse pounding in my ears. The winding road back to civilization seemed endless. I glanced in the rearview mirror periodically, half expecting to see him chasing after me, but the road behind was empty. Just as I managed to breathe again, I heard a clatter from the back seat. I looked around. Time stopped for me. My tackle box was there, open wide, but I had packed it on the shore of the lake. It was then that my cell phone rang. I picked it and found a text message from an unknown number. You shouldn't have left. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I typed back, "Who is this?" Another message came through. I warned you. Fear flooded me. I pulled over to the side of the road, gasping for air. I looked around me, half expecting Dave to be lurking in the shadows, but I saw only me, the woods, and the flickering headlights. Then the reality of things smacked me right between the eyes. The knife. The way Dave had talked about the lake, his warnings, the way he had been watching me. A dread began to rise up in my body. I hadn't even had time to think when in my rearview mirror I saw something. A man in the middle of the road, waving a hand with something shiny. It was Dave. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. I backed up slowly, ready to make my escape. Just then, Dave took a step closer, and with his hand raised, yelled out,
"You forgot something!"
as he tossed something into the open window. It splat, thudded into the passenger seat. I froze, realizing it was a bloodied fish knife.
"Now you know what I meant,"
he shouted aloud in the stillness of the air. Shaking my hands, I picked and looked at the dark red stains on it. It was a warning. No, it was a message. Harder than any blow, the realization struck me, and quite brutally, somehow I had stumbled into much darker territory than I ever imagined. Panic ran through my veins. I floored the gas and at the last minute swerved past Dave to get back on the road as my mind raced. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something of menace observing me, far deadlier than I could appreciate. I was getting closer to town and saw a cop car pulled over on the side of the road. Not even thinking, I swerved over and rolled down my window. "Help! There's a guy back at Pine Lake. He's acting weirder, and I think he's dangerous." The officer looked at me in shock.
"Calm down. What did he do?"
I gulped some air in preparation. I tried to get my voice together.
He was talking about people who vanish. I think he's involved in something bad. You should check out?" I called out. The cop nodded in concern. "Fine, let's put an end to this." I felt myself relax as they sped off to the lake. I continued to pace up and down on the roadside, trying to calm myself down. They took what seemed like hours, but the officers shortly returned. They seemed somber. "We found him, Ethan," one of them said. "We apprehended Dave, and it seems he's not acting alone. There are suggestions of a bigger event, a couple of missing people in the locality." I felt my heart literally sink. It was a situation that was very deep. They were not just dealing with one creepy guy, rather they had discovered a massive human trafficking ring, which utilized the lake as a lure. They even take their cell numbers from the entries. "Thank you," I said, feeling relief and fear mix in my voice. I did not know. As I waited for the officers to take my statement, my phone buzzed for the third time. I reached over and pulled it out. My stomach fell. The message was simple. I read it in silence. "You think you're safe? You have no idea what we're capable of." A chill ran through me. The operation wasn't just about Dave. It had been a network far beyond my worst fears. They had eyes and ears everywhere, and still, they watched me.
It started out like any other evening. Just me and Emily, my little sister, heading to McDonald's after school. It was one of those harmless rituals we did whenever we had a chance. Emily loved the place, especially the indoor playground, and I didn't mind. It gave me a break, a chance to sip on a Coke and scroll through my phone while she burned off energy. The place was almost empty when we walked in. A few families scattered around, the occasional soft beep of the fryers behind the counter, and the fluorescent lights that always felt a bit too harsh. It should have felt normal, safe even, but the moment we sat down, something felt off. I can't explain it, call it gut instinct, but the second we walked in, I had this eerie sense that we weren't alone, not in the usual way. Someone was watching us.
Stop it, Sarah.
I scolded myself. Emily was happy. I should have been too. How could I when I spotted him? A man, sitting alone near the front, huddled in a dirty gray hoodie, his hair sticking out in greasy strands. His eyes, though, those were what chilled me. They were fixed, almost unblinking, on Emily as she played with the interactive display near the counter. She was completely unaware, tapping the screen with her usual bubbly enthusiasm. But his gaze, it was cold and hungry. I tried to shake it off as I ordered. I mean, it's a public place, right? I told myself he was probably just some random guy, maybe a little rough around the edges. No big deal. But the way he was watching her, it unnerved me. By the time I sat down with our food, he was still there, unmoved, his focus unwavering. I glanced at Emily, then back to him. His eyes shifted the moment I caught him. For a split second, our gazes locked, and something about the way he looked away, like I wasn't supposed to notice him, sent a wave of nausea through me. I should have grabbed Emily then. I should have left, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her run off to the playground area, giggling as she disappeared into the maze of plastic tubes and slides. I tried to relax, telling myself I was being paranoid. I mean, what could happen? There were other people around, workers, families. But when I glanced back at the front of the restaurant, the man was standing. He wasn't leaving, though. No, he was standing near the door, watching Emily again. His eyes darting toward me occasionally, but always returning to her. My heart kicked up in my chest. Go talk to the manager, I thought. Tell someone. But just as I was about to stand up, he turned and stepped outside, disappearing into the parking lot. Relief washed over me. He was gone. Or so I thought. We ate quickly, my nerves still on edge, and I let Emily play a little longer, thinking the worst was over. I got up to throw our trash away, and when I glanced toward the playground, my heart froze. Emily was gone. Somehow, in the span of mere seconds, he had slipped back into the restaurant. I hadn't even seen him come in, but now he wasn't just watching. He was moving, fast. He was walking out with Emily in his arms, struggling. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I screamed her name, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and desperate.
Emily!
I ran. Everything around me blurred. Tables, chairs, people. None of it mattered. The only thing I could focus on was that filthy hand gripping her, pulling her toward the exit. Her small body twisted, trying to break free, but he was strong, too strong. She screamed, and the sound of it, that high-pitched, terrified scream, shattered something inside me. I lunged at him, clawing at his arm, his hoodie, anything I could reach. He grunted, his face twisted in frustration, and for a moment it felt like he might win, like he might rip her away from me and disappear into the night. "You bitch!" he hissed. But then, a worker, a teenage boy no older than me, came running. He grabbed the man's other arm and suddenly, the stranger's grip loosened. He shoved Emily to the floor, and before I could react, he was gone, bolting through the door, vanishing into the dark. I held Emily, shaking. Both of us cried while people crowded around us. Voices blended into a murmur of concern and disbelief, but I didn't care about them. All I cared about was Emily, her small body trembling in my arms, her face pale and tear-streaked. The police came, of course. They asked questions, took statements, but it didn't matter. The man was gone, vanished like smoke. And no matter how much they reassured me, I knew deep down they wouldn't find him. And for weeks, life went on, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I passed a McDonald's, every time I heard the squeak of a playground slide or the shuffle of feet in the crowd, my heart would race, my breath would catch, and I'd find myself scanning the faces around me, waiting to see him again. And then one day, I did. I was with Emily, walking through the mall, when I felt it, the same cold, prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I turned, and there he was, standing near the entrance, his hoodie pulled tight over his face, watching us. I froze, terror clawing at my throat. He smiled, a slow, crooked smile, and disappeared into the crowd. And I knew he was waiting for another chance, waiting for us. It was the day before Thanksgiving. I should have been excited, preparing for the holiday, but something wasn't right. Gilberto, my husband, had been acting strange lately. He'd been spending hours locked away in his study, always on his laptop. It could be just work stress. He was a cop after all. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, and the man I'd been in love with was a monster in disguise. That day, while vacuuming, I noticed his laptop sitting on the dining table. The screen was lit up, and Gilberto was nowhere in sight. I shouldn't have looked, but something pulled me to it. I glanced at the screen as my heart pounded harder with each passing second. Could my husband be seeing someone? With hitched breath, I went through his conversation. Surely there were chats, but it wasn't anything I expected. Gilberto wasn't cheating on me. I wish he was. I read one, then another. The words, they didn't make sense at first. Roast her slowly, cook her alive. And then I saw the names. Women we knew. I felt sick. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The things he was describing, what he'd do to them. He was planning to kidnap these women. He talked about eating them, like they were some kind of Thanksgiving dinner. My whole body went cold. This was my husband, the man I married, the man who kissed our daughter goodnight every evening. My heart was racing, and I felt dizzy like I was about to pass out. What had I just found? That's when I heard his footsteps upstairs. My blood froze. He was coming down. I slammed the laptop shut and shoved it into the hall closet just before Gilberto arrived. He smiled at me, full of affection, like nothing was wrong. But his eyes, they were different, darker, colder. "Everything okay, love?" He asked so casually I was momentarily certain I was hallucinating. But I knew. I'd seen it all. I forced a smile.
Yeah, just cleaning.
My voice shook. He stared at me for a beat too long, like he was waiting for something, and then he turned and walked into the kitchen. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. I was trapped in my own home with a man I didn't recognize anymore. My husband was planning to kill and eat people who were his friends. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those chats, months planned he had laid out in detail. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, Gilberto was his usual self, smiling, laughing, playing with our daughter. But I couldn't look at him without feeling my stomach turn. He was a monster, hiding behind a cop's uniform, pretending to be a loving father. I watched him closely all day. His every move felt calculated and deliberate, like he was wearing a mask. But when our friends arrived for dinner, a hunger simmered in his eyes. Was I blind to never notice it before? I wanted to scream, warn our friends. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were in danger, sitting just feet away from the man who had fantasized about eating them. As the evening went on, I couldn't take it anymore. The tension inside me was unbearable. I excused myself and went upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. My hands shook as I picked up the phone, and I called the police. What do you even say in a situation like this? How do you tell them that your husband is a cop plotting to kidnap and eat people? But I had to do it. For my daughter, for myself, for all the women who might end up on his twisted menu. When they came for him, it was like a nightmare coming alive. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and Gilberto was hauled out of our home in handcuffs. He looked at me with such venom, like I was the one who betrayed him. But I wasn't the one with those sick, twisted thoughts. He was. I will never forgive you. Never. I will never forgive you. I thought I would feel relief, but all I felt was a deep, sinking dread. The man I had married, the father of my child, was capable of things I couldn't even begin to understand. He was charged with conspiracy to kidnap, with plans to kill and eat women. They called him the cannibal cop. I saved those women. Hell, I saved myself. But at what cost? My life, my family, everything was shattered. And Thanksgiving? It'll never be the same again. This story is based on the true case of Gilberto Valle, the cannibal cop, who was arrested in 2012 for plotting to kidnap and eat women. His wife discovered his disturbing online plans and turned him into the authorities, leading to his arrest. Valle was charged with conspiracy to kidnap and later released in 2014. Gilberto lost custody of his daughter. I never thought I'd be scared of my own phone, but now every time I get a Snapchat notification, my heart races. It all started a few months ago when my best friend showed me some messages he'd been getting. We were hanging out in his room after school when he suddenly got real quiet and held out his phone. The screen showed a Snapchat from someone called Talon the Goon. It was a video of a kid getting punched in the face, then kicked while he was down. The caption read, "Who's next?" I felt sick watching it. When I asked Preston who these guys were, he just shrugged, but I could see he was worried. He told me they apparently called themselves the Gilbert Goons, and they were from our school and others around here. Apparently, they just hurt people for fun. Over the next few weeks, he kept getting more snaps like this. Sometimes it was videos of fights, other times pictures of brass knuckles or guns with scary captions. We couldn't do anything. If we turned into snitches, they'd beat us up or something. So we just carried on like nothing happened. A week before Halloween, we got a snap about a party nearby, and there was going to be free drinks. So my pal and I obviously went. I picked him up in my old Corolla. He was dressed as a basketball player, and I had on this cheap vampire costume. The party was insane when we got there. Hundreds of kids, most in costume. Music blasting, the smell of weed and booze everywhere. We hung out near the snack table for a while, talking to some kids from school. But then I saw my friend tense up. I followed his gaze and saw a group of older guys walk in. They weren't in costume, just jeans and hoodies. but the way other kids cleared a path for them, I wasn't realizing what was happening. We tried to leave, but before we could, one of them stepped in front of us. I recognized him from some of the snaps. Treston Billy, one of the ringleaders. He grabbed my friend's arm when we tried to go around him. I tried to stand up for him, but Treston just looked at me with these cold, hard eyes. He said my friend needed to have a little chat with him. Next thing I knew, 2 more goons were behind us, and they started pushing us towards the backyard. Once we were outside, away from everyone else, it all happened so fast. Treston shoved my friend to the ground, yelling at him about ignoring them. My bro tried to calm things down, but Treston wasn't having it. He punched him hard and he went down. I tried to help, but someone held me back. I had to just stand there and watch as the goons beat him up. I mean, the sound of their fists and feet hitting him, it was brutal. My boy's body jerking with every blow. Like, that's gonna stick with me forever. I can't even tell you how long it went on. It felt like hours, but finally, I heard one of them say, "He's out." They left him there, just lying on the ground, not moving at all. There was blood on his face, smeared all over his costume. Then Treston, the smug jerk, looked right at me and grinned, saying, "Your turn next, vampire boy," before they just casually walked away, like it was no big deal, like it didn't even matter. As soon as they were gone, I ran over to my pal, trying to shake him awake, but he didn't move. Nothing. My hands were shaking so bad when I called 911, and I remember just sitting there, holding his head in my lap, crying, begging him to wake up. But he didn't. The next couple of days, they're a blur. I was in and out of hospitals and police stations, trying to explain what happened, but none of it mattered because my boy never woke up. He passed away on October 30th, just 2 days after the attack. I thought that was it, that it was all finally over, but I was so wrong. The day after he died, I got this Snapchat from some random account. It was a picture of him in his hospital bed, and it was clear that whoever took it didn't have permission. The caption? "You're next, vampire boy." The events described are based on a real tragedy in Queen Creek, Arizona, a suburb southeast of Phoenix. On October 28, 2023, 16-year-old Preston Lord was attacked at a Halloween party. Preston, a sophomore and basketball player, attended the party with his teammates, advertised on Snapchat as a Halloween costume rager with free alcohol. It drew over 200 teens from local high schools. During the party, Preston and his friends were confronted by a group of older boys. After one friend recorded a fight, tensions escalated. Preston was knocked unconscious by Talon Renner, and others continued beating him until they fled. Witnesses saw someone dance on Preston before he was dragged from the road. Police found Preston with life-threatening injuries. He passed away 2 days later. The group responsible, known as the Gilbert Goons, had been involved in violent acts since 2022, sharing videos on social media like Snapchat. 7 individuals: Treston Billy, 18, Jacob Mesner, 17, Taylor Sherman, 19, Talon Renner, 17, Dominic Turner, 20, William Owen Hines, 18, and Talon Vigil, had been charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. They have all pleaded not guilty, with the trial set for July 2025 due to the large volume of evidence. I've always liked winter mornings. Something about the way the cold air bites at your skin feels refreshing. It clears your head like nothing else. I usually jogged early, before the sun rose, when the streets were empty and the world felt like mine alone. That morning wasn't any different. At least, that's what I thought when I laced up my sneakers and stepped out the door. The air was biting cold with a thick, clinging fog in the otherwise dimly lit street. The street lights flickered every now and then, casting faint pools of light that barely cut through the haze. But I didn't mind. The silence was peaceful, the world was still asleep, and I liked it that way. I started my run, feeling the rhythmic thud of my feet against the pavement. My breath came out in little clouds, puffing in front of me like smoke signals. Everything felt so serene. Empty streets, quiet houses, just me, the cold, and the fog. After about 10 minutes, I reached the park. It's usually busy during the day, but now it was deserted, not a soul in sight. I'd figured I'd do 3 laps around it and head home before the chill really set in. The first lap was fine, but halfway through the second, I started to feel off. It wasn't immediate, just a creeping sense of unease. Like the air had grown heavier, the silence became more oppressive. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. But every time I looked back, all I saw was the fog, thick and impenetrable. By the time I started the third lap, the feeling had only gotten worse. My skin prickled, my heartbeat quickened, and I kept thinking I heard faint footsteps behind me. I'd stop and turn, scanning the park, but there was no one, just the low groan of trees swaying in the cold wind.
Stop hallucinating, Lizzie.
I told myself. Maybe the fog was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to take a break. I plopped myself on one of the benches by the playground to catch my breath. As soon as I sat down, I heard it, rustling, like someone stepping on dry leaves. My pulse spiked, and I shot up, eyes darting around.
Is anyone there?
I called out, my voice sounding small and shaky. No answer. I scanned the area, trying to focus, but the fog was too thick. It was like trying to see through a wall of smoke. And then I heard it, a soft chuckle. The sound cut through the silence, so sharp it made my skin crawl.
Who's there?
My voice was more desperate now, but still no reply. Only the eerie, faint laughter, closer this time. And then she stepped out from the fog. A woman, tall and gaunt, her red hair matted and hanging in limp strands around her face. She was wearing a torn white nightgown, stained with crimson, awfully resembling blood. My eyes slowly traced upwards until I met her bloodshot one. Her eyes. God, her eyes. They were wide, wild, smeared with mascara like she'd been crying for hours. I froze, unable to move, my breath caught in my throat. The woman's lips curled into a smile, but there was nothing kind about it. It was the kind of smile that sent chills down your spine, the kind of smile that made you want to run. And then I saw her hand. She was clutching something. A finger. A man's severed finger. There was blood dripping from it, staining the snow at her feet, and dangling from the finger was a wedding ring. My stomach turned. I felt bile rise in my throat. I took a step back and stumbled to the ground. The woman let out a hollow laugh.
Now he's single,
She said, shoving the finger in the air. Her tone was mocking, almost gleeful.
He doesn't have to hide his affair from me anymore.
Before I could even process what she had said, her eyes rolled back into her head, and she collapsed on the ground right beside me. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind was blank, overwhelmed by a flood of horror. And then somehow, I snapped out of it. My hands fumbled for my phone as I shakily dialed 911. The cops arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. They took the woman away, but not before telling me the truth. Sophia was an artist who had killed her husband while he slept. She was somehow convinced he was having an affair with his secretary. Afterward, she cut off his ring finger and wandered the streets in a daze. I was later told that Sophia was sent to a mental institution. She never spoke a word again after that night. And me? I haven't jogged in the early morning since. Not ever. It's strange, the way you never think it'll happen to you. Those stories on the news, the tragic ones, where someone's loved one disappears. I always thought they happened to other people. Not us, not my mom. But I guess that's what everyone thinks, until it does happen. I was 13 when it happened. It was just a regular Thursday night. She kissed me goodbye before heading out. Her eyes were tired, but still filled with the kind of warmth only my mom could give.
I'll be back soon,
She said. She never did, and I didn't know until it was too late. That night stretched on endlessly. I sat in the dark, watching the clock tick, hoping any second the door would creak open, and she'd walk in with that tired smile. Midnight came and went. Then, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, still nothing. The silence in the house grew louder, suffocating, and dread started creeping in. It was around 3 o'clock when my phone buzzed with a live location.
Mom?
She was in a parking lot, but why? My stomach twisted. I called her again and again, but every call went straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring made my heart pound harder. Was she stuck? Hurt? In danger? I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my hoodie and bolted out the door. The streets were cold and empty. When I got to Waverly Roads, I just couldn't walk anymore. Clutching my phone tight, I ran faster than I ever had in my life. My mind racing, praying that I'd find her car, that everything would be fine, and that this would all just be a misunderstanding. But when I turned the corner into that dark parking lot, I knew her car was there, parked at an odd angle, headlights still on, but no sign of her. That's when I saw her, lying in the lot, her body twisted in a way that bodies aren't supposed to twist. My heart stopped. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. She was so still. Her face was pale, her eyes open but lifeless. It was like the air had been sucked out of the world, and all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I dropped to my knees beside her, trembling.
Mom?
The word barely made it past my lips. I reached out, touching her cold hand, and that's when I heard it, the crunch of gravel behind me. A slow, deliberate step. I whipped around, my breath caught in my throat, and there she was, Miranda, my father's wife, my stepmother, though I never called her that. She stood there in the dim light. In her hand was something I couldn't process at first.
You shouldn't have come here, kid.
She said, slinging the rope in the air.
You did that? Why?
It wasn't a question. She took a step closer, her smile growing darker.
Custody, honey. Your father wanted you back, but the bitch wasn't ready to let go. So, we had to make sure she couldn't fight anymore.
My chest tightened with horror. This wasn't just about Mom. This was about me.
Don't worry. Your dad knows too. Family means everything.
She said, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. She started moving towards me, slow and steady, like a predator toying with its prey.
Now, why don't you come with me, and we'll make sure everything gets sorted out.
I didn't need a better trigger. Sprinted across the lot, the cold air biting at my face as Miranda's footsteps echoed behind me. She was faster than I expected, closing the distance as I weaved between parked cars, trying to put anything between us. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I couldn't stop. If I stopped, she'd catch me, and I knew what would happen if she did. I could hear her breathing, heavy and ragged just behind me. You can't run forever, kid. We'll find you, just like we found that hoe.
Dad, Miranda wasn't lying.
The words sliced through me, and I felt my chest tighten with fear. I wasn't running just for me now. I was running for my mother. Up ahead, I saw the faint glow of a streetlight. Hope surged through me as I spotted the small, nondescript building, a police station. I pushed myself harder, every step agonizing as I neared the door. My fingers grazed the cold metal handle just as I felt Dad's hand grab the back of my hoodie, yanking me backward. I stumbled, his breath hot on my neck. his grip tightening. "Didn't your mom tell you? You're coming with us!" he hissed. In a moment of pure adrenaline, I twisted, slipping out of his grasp and throwing myself at the door. It flung open, and I collapsed inside, gasping for air. The officer behind the desk stood up, startled, as I slammed the door shut and locked it.
They killed Mom!
I screamed, tears streaming down my face.
They're outside! Please help me!
The officer's face paled as he rushed to the window, peering out into the night. Miranda and Dad were convicted, but I knew everything wasn't finished, for in the dark, I'd always hear Mom screaming. I had only been travel blogging for about a year before one of my reviews of an old traditional hotel went viral. The hotel invited me and paid me to review it further, and that is when I realized that my passion could mint me some old Benjamins. Just 4 months into this new business, Eli Fitzgerald, owner of an old mountain lodge, invited me to review it for its grand Christmas reopening. The lodge had been closed for nearly a century, buried in an avalanche, but Eli's team had restored it. I figured it would be a quiet week in the Rockies, a good story for the blog. When I arrived, the place felt wrong. It wasn't just the lodge itself, massive and looming, as if it had grown out of the mountains, but the staff, too. They were dressed in clothes from another era, bow ties and long skirts, and spoke in a stilted, old-fashioned way. They didn't really smile. Eli greeted me at the door, his tall figure draped in a thick coat, his eyes too sharp, too cold. "Mr. James, welcome. You'll find it very peaceful here." Peaceful? Maybe, but the whole place had a strange atmosphere, like it was holding its breath. I settled into my room, a cozy enough space with a fireplace and large bed. The wind howled outside, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Still, the long trip had worn me out, so I lay down and tried to sleep. It was just past midnight when I woke to the sound of children laughing. The high-pitched giggles echoed through the hallways, followed by the faintest melody, a piano playing Silent Night, which I remembered from when I tried my hands at instruments in college. Confused, I checked my phone. 12:47 a.m. Eli had told me I was the only guest, so who were the kids? And the music? I opened my door, stepped into the hall, and listened. The laughter faded, but the music continued, like it was drifting from somewhere deep within the lodge. I followed it down to the lobby, expecting to find some explanation. A stereo, maybe, or a staff member playing the piano. But when I got there, the lobby was empty. The piano, covered in dust, hadn't been touched in years. I asked Eli about it the next morning. "I heard kids laughing last night, and music. Thought you said I was the only one here." Eli didn't blink. "You are, Mr. James. The wind can play tricks on the ears around these parts. I hope you would mention that the lodge brings out an old-world charm, especially in the nights." His calm, unbothered response left me uneasy, but I didn't press it. I explored the lodge that day, snapping pictures for the blog, and that's when I found the letters. There was a loose floorboard in my room. After stepping on it a few times, I pried it up out of curiosity. Beneath it, tied together with twine, was a stack of yellowed letters written by someone named Jeremiah Hughes, who built the lodge over a century ago. There was a picture of his accompanying the letters, dressed in an old three-piece suit, a pocket watch to his breast pocket, and a long, wavy mustache. The first few letters were harmless enough, talking about the beauty of the lodge and how his family loved the mountains. But as I read on, the letters grew darker. "There is something wrong with this place. At night I hear it, whispers, scratching at the walls. It wants something from us, and I fear we cannot refuse." Another letter, written days before the avalanche, chilled me to the bone. "The ritual is the only way. We must appease it, or it will take us all." That night, I don't really know how else to say it, but the lodge came alive. The whispering started around midnight, faint at first, like someone just outside my door. I pulled the blankets tighter, trying to ignore it, but then I heard my name. Shot up, heart pounding, and saw shadows moving along the walls. They writhed and twisted in ways that didn't make sense, like they were alive, slithering toward me. I backed away, cold sweat dripping down my neck, but they kept coming. James, come back. I ran out of the room, my footsteps echoing down the hall, but no matter where I went, the whispers followed me, calling out my name. The walls seemed to close in on me, pulsing like they were breathing, and just when I tried to look out the window in the dark, the glass fogged, like someone had blown hot air on it. I took some steps back and reminded myself that I might be imagining things due to being alone at this place, but just when the deep breathing calmed down, I felt someone's cold hand gripping mine. I yelled and ran down the stairs. Thankfully, in the lobby, I found Eli standing by the fireplace, his back towards me. I need to leave right now. There is some strange shit going on at this lodge. Eli didn't turn around. It's too late. The house has been disturbed. It doesn't let go easily. My blood ran cold. I didn't care what he meant. I just wanted to get out. I grabbed my coat, ran to my car, and drove down the mountain as fast as I could, not caring about the luggage that I had left behind. As fate would have it, I learned in the news that a sudden avalanche swallowed the lodge early in the morning, taking its new owner with it. Rescue efforts were underway for a week when the authorities finally reached to my luggage. They found my phone and laptop and sent it back to me. My laptop never worked again, but I was surprised that my phone fired up. Gathering courage, I decided to check the photos and videos, which I had clicked of the place to post on my blog. To my surprise, in those pictures were captured children and people dressed in old dresses whom I had never seen. And then, in one picture, I saw a man sitting on a chair next to my bed. He was dressed in an old three-piece suit, a pocket watch to his breast pocket, and carried a long, wavy mustache. The original owner of the lodge, Mr. Jeremiah Hughes. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway. Steven and I needed a break from everything. Work, family, the city. So we rented an Airbnb in the woods, a cozy cabin deep in the middle of nowhere. It was winter, and the world around us was draped in snow, making it feel like we were completely isolated from everything else. Exactly what we wanted. We arrived at around sunset. The cabin was adorable, with a creaky wooden deck, and inside, a stone fireplace already laid out with logs. By the time we unpacked and settled in, it was dark outside. We opened a bottle of red wine. After a few glasses, Steven suggested we explore the property. There was supposed to be a small clearing behind the cabin, so we bundled up and trudged out into the cold. We were tipsy, walking haphazardly and giggling. We soon stumbled upon a small mound, partially hidden in snow, near the edge of the woods. Strange, there was a stone marker, like a headstone of a grave, but there was no name, just a weird symbol. It looked like two interlocking circles, with a serpent twisting between them. Steven knelt down to brush off the snow, laughing. He was always the braver one between us, always curious.
It's a grave, right? Maybe it's someone's pet.
I don't know. No name. Could be anything. He was drunk, and in his ridiculous state, he unzipped his pants and started peeing on it, laughing all the while. I swatted at him, telling him he was being disrespectful, but he just waved me off, laughing as he finished. I felt uneasy. Something about that grave unsettled me, but I was too tipsy to really process it. So we headed back to the cabin, stumbling and laughing. That night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was like scratching, the kind of sharp, repetitive noise that made my skin crawl. I reached over, but Steven wasn't in bed. My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up. The scratching, it was coming from outside. I pulled on my coat, my hands trembling as I opened the door. I saw Steven standing in the snow, staring out into the woods, motionless. His breath was visible in the air, and I could hear that scratching sound, louder, like nails on stone.
Stefan, what are you doing?
He didn't answer. The scratching grew louder, a horrible grating noise that made me feel like I was losing my mind. It wants to come out. His voice was flat, almost distant, like he was in some kind of trance. I grabbed his arm, trying to shake him out of it.
Come back right now. Something isn't right.
The grave. It wants to come out. He pulled away from me and ran towards the grave. I followed him, the snow stinging my face as I stumbled after him. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the snow, his hands bare as he dug into the frozen ground.
Stop it! Stefan, stop!
I tried to pull him away, but he was strong, stronger than I'd ever seen him. His nails were breaking, his fingers red and raw as he tore at the snow like he was possessed. And then I saw it, a fox emerging from the woods. Its eyes glowed in the dark, an unnatural eerie light that made my stomach twist. It watched us, its gaze fixed on Steven, but when it came out, I was shocked. It wasn't red, but black. Finally, Steven stopped. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and unfocused. I pulled him to his feet and we started back towards the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. As we reached the deck, a deep growl echoed from the direction of the grave, low and guttural. I turned, and there was the fox, sitting atop the mound, its eyes still glowing, its body curled up like it was guarding something, looking at us. Steven collapsed onto the bed, and I watched him until his breathing evened out, his face relaxed. I couldn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the window. The next morning, Steven acted like nothing had happened. He didn't remember a thing. I showed him his hands, expecting the torn nails, the bloody fingertips, but they were fine. Perfectly fine. He laughed it off, said I must have been dreaming, but I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. We packed up, ready to leave. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Steven was humming to himself as he loaded our bags in the car, completely unfazed. But as he put his hand on the steering wheel, a jolt ran through me. There, just under his wrist, was a small scar, the shape of two interlocking circles with a serpent twisting between them, the same symbol from the grave.
Stefan? Where did you get this?
He had no answer.
It's the same symbol as the grave.
What grave?
The one we saw yesterday.
But he just looked confused. When I insisted, he pulled me by my hand and took me to the place of the grave. But to my shock, when we reached there was nothing. I felt a chill run through me, a deep, gnawing fear that settled in my bones. I did not care to investigate and pulled Steven to the car, driving away. But I am certain that we disturbed an otherworldly presence that day. It was a Wednesday night, and I had no idea that evening would change my life forever. I had been studying late in the dorm's common room, flipping through pages I could barely focus on. The clock ticked over to midnight, and most of the campus had gone still. Silent, save for the occasional creak of floorboards or the distant, muffled voices of those in their rooms. I should have gone to bed, but something made me stay up, some strange restlessness I couldn't shake. Then I heard it. 3 knocks at the door, slow, deliberate. My heart gave a single hard thump in my chest. I looked around. No one else was awake, at least no one in my immediate vicinity. My roommate was out for the weekend, visiting family, so it was just me. I got up and moved toward the door. When I opened the door, there she was, Kara Welsh. I knew Kara, but only in the way you know someone through campus. She was popular, a gymnast. We had a class together once, but we'd never really spoken. What was she doing here? Kara? I asked, my voice catching my throat. Her eyes were wide, but not in the normal sense. Her hair hung in damp tendrils around her face, as if she had just run through the rain, but it hadn't rained in days.
Let me in.
She choked, shivering as she pushed past me into the room. I watched as she stood in the center of the space, her back to me. I was too stunned to stop her. Her shoulders were trembling, though not from the cold. "Kara, you okay?" I asked, moving toward her slowly. She turned her head just enough to let me see her profile, and my stomach dropped. There was something on her skin, a smear of red. Blood? I stepped back instinctively.
What happened?
She didn't answer right away, just stood there, swaying slightly.
He won't leave me alone.
She sobbed. Her eyes flicked to mine, wild and unfocused.
He's watching. He's always watching.
A chill ran down my spine. A stalker? I asked, bewildered. She didn't answer. Instead, she started pacing back and forth, her movements jittery, as if something was crawling under her skin. Every now and then, she would glance toward the window, as if expecting to see someone out there in the darkness.
I didn't mean to do it, Jose.
She broke down suddenly. Do what? She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes full of something I couldn't place. Guilt? Fear?
It was an accident.
She said, her voice barely audible.
I know he won't stop. He's here. He's everywhere.
I stepped toward her, trying to understand what she was talking about. Who's here? She didn't answer. She trembled as waves of hysteria traveled through her. I pulled the curtain and peeped outside, but there was nothing there, just the empty campus, bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. Kara sobbed harder, not wailing, but these broken, gasping sobs, like something inside her had snapped. I didn't know what to do. I should have called someone, anyone, but I was caught in the tension of the moment. Just as I was about to speak, Kara's body stiffened, her eyes wide and terrified as the door behind me burst open. There he stood, a man, his face obscured by shadows, his presence overpowering. I couldn't move. He looked at Kara, and in one chilling second, I understood. It was him. It only took a second. He raised a gun. The sound of the shots rang out, and Kara collapsed in a pool of her own blood. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It happened so fast. Too fast. The man didn't even glance in my direction. Without a word, he turned and walked out, disappearing into the night as if nothing had happened. For what felt like hours, I stared at Kara's lifeless body. The air was heavy with the scent of blood and death. The boys had come out of their rooms. Somebody during the commotion dialed 911. Soon, the world around me blurred into a fog of sirens, police, and paramedics. They were late, as I was. They arrested the man the next day, a 23-year-old classmate. No one knew why he did it. No one could explain why Kara, of all people, had been his target. And the questions lingered like ghosts as the investigation went on. Even though they caught him, the horror of that night won't leave me. It clung to the walls of the dorm to be recounted for eternity. We were shifted to another dorm, but sometimes late at night, when the campus is quiet, people still talk about Kara. They say they hear knocking, slow and deliberate, coming from behind the door of an empty room. Some say it's the sound of a restless soul. Others say it's Kara, still haunted by the questions that will never have answers. Delivering pizzas wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid the rent. That Friday night seemed like any other, but then I got an order to deliver to the local hospital. A hospital at 11 p.m.? I figured maybe the night shift needed a break from whatever sad excuse for food they served in the cafeteria. I pulled up to the front of Holy Spirit Hospital. The parking lot was eerily deserted. The place always gave me the creeps. I walked inside. At the front desk was a half-asleep receptionist, slumped over, headphones in. "Pizza delivery?" He didn't look up, just pointed toward a hallway. "Junior doctors on second floor. Break room, elevator down that way." But the elevator down the hallway wasn't working. Rather than going back to the receptionist, I walked further and saw another elevator. It looked old. Its doors creaked as they opened. Without thinking much, I stepped inside. The doors slid behind me, and that's when I realized I wasn't alone. There was a man standing in the corner wearing scrubs. He looked off. His skin was clammy, pale, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His face was twisted in anger, or maybe pain, but his eyes, they were dead, flat, unblinking, staring straight ahead. Rough shift? He didn't respond, just stood there, a yellow wristband on his hand. I tried to speak again, figuring he was just too tired to chat. You a doctor or patient? Nothing, not even a grunt this time. I glanced up at the elevator panel, watching the floor slowly tick by. The lights inside flickered for a second. That's when I heard it, a soft thud, like something heavy dropped just above us. Did you hear that? I turned to look at him. The man's head had jerked slightly to the side. His neck snapped at an unnatural angle. His eyes, once staring ahead, were now locked onto me, wide and wild. Thud. Louder this time. The sound of something or someone slamming against the top of the elevator. I backed up, my breath catching in my throat, and frantically pressed the button for the next floor. I didn't care where it stopped. I just needed out of that elevator. The man didn't move, didn't respond. His twisted neck stayed locked on me, his lips curling up in a strange manner. He looked sick. I suddenly remembered that the hospital had a specialized mental ward, and it spooked me. That man could probably be a mental patient. Finally, the doors opened, and I bolted out of the elevator. I turned around to catch my breath, and the elevator door slammed shut. He was still inside, but as the doors closed, I swore I saw his hand reach out toward me, like he was trying to follow. The hallway was silent, too silent. As I walked, my footsteps echoed too loudly. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Hello? No answer. I passed another door, the window smeared with something dark. I squinted, stepping closer when suddenly, bang! The door rattled violently, as if something inside had slammed into it. I jumped back, heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the door, holding my breath, waiting for something to burst through. But after a moment, the hallway fell back into silence. That is when I saw what the sign on the door read. Mortuary. I was done. I wasn't delivering anything. I needed to leave. I turned on my heel and sprinted toward the stairwell, throwing the door open and barreling down the stairs two at a time. When I reached the first floor, I flung the door open, nearly crashing into a young doctor standing in the hallway. Whoa, slow down. You all right? I couldn't catch my breath, words spilling out as I tried to explain. There's a guy. Elevator. Yellow wristband. Something's wrong, man. Could be a psycho on the loose. His face went pale as soon as I mentioned the wristband. Wait, yellow? Are you sure? I nodded, still panting. His expression tightened. That's not possible. The yellow wristbands, they're for the deceased, from the critical care unit. I froze. My skin prickled as a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I stammered, trying to process what he was saying. But he was in the elevator with me. That elevator's been closed for months. My throat became heavy. A strange shiver ran down my spine. I didn't argue. I didn't wait for more explanations. I just turned and bolted for the exit. But as I reached the doors, the hospital's automatic doors slid open by themselves, as if expecting me. A cold gust blew through, and then I heard it, the sound that would haunt me for weeks after. A soft, rasping voice from behind me, too close to my ear. Next time I follow you. I had always heard the rumors about the old building, the way people said it was cursed, haunted by the suicides from years back when it was an office complex. But it's 2024, and I was working at McDonald's, not some horror movie set. Yet, that night changed everything. It was a Tuesday, dead slow as usual. I texted my boyfriend Ryan to come by. We were both making ends meet, and on some nights, I'd just stay back late and have our dinner date there in the McDonald's. It was getting late, and there was no sign of him. I stood behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, when I saw a shadow moving toward the door. Finally, Ryan. I decided to mess with him and crouch behind the counter, ready to jump out and scare him as soon as he walked in. The bell above the door chimed softly as it opened. I held my breath, but nothing. No footsteps, no sounds. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. 5, 10, 15. Still, nothing.
Ryan?
I whispered, peeking over the counter. The dining area was empty. The door had closed, but no one had come in. My heart fluttered with a sudden unease. I stood up slowly, scanning the room. Maybe he was messing with me too. That had to be it. I walked around the counter, checking the tables, even the bathroom door.
Ryan? Seriously, this isn't funny.
No answer. Just the low hum of the machines and the weight of the empty restaurant pressing in on me. Then, out of nowhere, there was a loud crash outside. My heart jumped, and I rushed out to see what had happened, fearing the worst. What if Ryan was hurt? The parking lot was empty, but there was a trash can lying on its side. The metal bent like something had fallen on it from above. I stood frozen, staring at it. There was no one around. No cars, no wind, no reason for it to be knocked over like that. I hadn't even heard any footsteps. Just as I was about to head back inside, I heard someone call my name. "Stacy!" I spun around to see Ryan sprinting towards me, out of breath and pale as a ghost. He grabbed my arms, his eyes wide with fear, and he looked around desperately. "Did you see that?"
See what?
"I saw someone jump, Stacy, from the roof, right here." He pointed to the top of the building, his voice shaking. I followed his gaze to the roof, but there was no one there.
There's no one up there, Ryan. You're freaking me out.
"I'm serious. Someone jumped from the roof. They should have fallen right here." The look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. I glanced back at the trash can, the dent in the metal. I had heard the loud sound as well, but I didn't want to believe it, nor tell about it to Ryan.
Come on, let's go inside.
I said, pulling him toward the door.
It's probably just...
Suddenly, a figure moved in the window reflection behind us. I froze. We spun around, but the parking lot was still empty. Nothing. I locked the door behind us in a hurry. I tried telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but then Ryan glanced toward the kitchen. "Is Ramon still here?" His voice was tight, like he was trying to stay calm.
No. He left an hour ago. Why?
Then who else is doing the graveyard shift? Solomon?
No one. It's just me.
I swear I just saw someone walk into the kitchen. I turned to look, my stomach dropping. The door to the kitchen was swinging ever so slightly, like someone had just passed through.
Could be one of those kids. They get high and steal burgers in the night.
But something didn't feel right. The air felt off, thick. I went inside the kitchen, but there was no one. Ryan followed, puzzled himself. That is when suddenly the fryer turned on by itself, the oil bubbling violently. I jumped back, my heart slamming in my chest. What the hell is happening? I didn't answer, too busy watching the fryer as the heat climbed higher, smoke beginning to curl from the oil. And just then, a loud bang echoed through the kitchen. The metal spatulas and pans started falling, crashing onto the floor. "Stacy, we need to get out of here!" Ryan was already backing away, his voice shaking. I ran to the fryer, trying to shut it off, but the buttons wouldn't work. As I pulled away, the lights flickered, my breath caught in my throat. In one of those flashes, I saw something. Someone standing in the doorway to the kitchen. A figure, tall and shadowed, watching us. The lights came back on. He was gone. Ryan pulled me toward the door. "Let's go!" We sprinted outside. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the keys twice. We got into Ryan's car and drove away. That is when I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing in the window of the McDonald's, dark, with glowing white eyes. It started like any other day. Just me, my delivery truck, and the endless loop of houses. I've been working for Amazon for a couple of months now. You get used to the routine, the predictability, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day on Elm Street. I was nearing the end of my route when I pulled up in front of an old 2-story house. Just another stop, I thought. And then I saw her. A woman standing on the porch, arms crossed, her face twisted in something between anger and disgust. She was staring right at me. I parked along the curb, double-checked my list, and headed toward her neighbor's door. That's when I heard the voice.
You can't park here.
I turned to face her. She was standing at the edge of her property now, one foot planted firmly on the sidewalk, the other in her yard. Her eyes were wild, dilated almost. "Ma'am, I'm just delivering a package next door. I'll be out of here in 2 minutes."
I don't care.
Her voice cracked, but it wasn't the shrillness that got me. It was the calm undercurrent beneath it, like something dangerous was simmering just below the surface.
This is my street. You don't belong here.
I've dealt with rude customers before, but this was something else. There was something about the way she stood. Too still, too tense, that sent a cold ripple down my spine. I forced a smile and tried keeping my voice steady. "I think the streets belong to all your neighbors, including that one." I pointed to the house next dude. "And I'm just doing my job." For a second, I thought she might let it go, but then she stepped closer, blocking my path.
Leave. Now.
I hesitated. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she looked at me, like she knew something I didn't. I muttered something about finishing my job. I bypassed her and quickly dropped the package at the neighbor's door. In seconds, I got back to the truck. But as I drove off, and I glanced in the rearview mirror, I felt it. The inevitable promise of an impending doom. That weirdo was still there, standing in the middle of the street, watching me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Hours later, after a long day of deliveries, I found myself driving home, my mind drifting back to the woman on Elm Street. The way she looked at me had stuck, burrowing its way into my thoughts. I shook it off. I was just tired, I told myself. Too many deliveries, too little sleep. Then I noticed something as I neared Elm Street again. A shadow, a figure standing by the side of the road. Her. My stomach dropped. She was waiting for me, all this while? I slowed down, hoping to pass by unnoticed, but the moment she saw my truck, she stepped right into the street, arms crossed just like before. I had to hit the brakes to avoid hitting her.
Get out of the truck.
She ordered, her voice low, eerily calm. I didn't move. My heart was pounding now, each thud echoing in my chest. "Ma'am, I don't want any trouble. I'm just headed home." Her face twisted into a smile, but it wasn't comforting. It was too wide, too forced, like she was mimicking a human expression she'd forgotten how to use.
You think you can just come into my neighborhood, do whatever you want, and leave?
Something in her voice told me this wasn't just about parking, something deeper, something twisted. "I'm leaving now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I shifted the truck into reverse. Her smile dropped.
Oh no, you're not.
She lunged toward my truck, her hands slamming against the hood. My breath hitched. What was she doing? I hit the gas, reversing down the street as fast as I could, tires screeching. In the rearview mirror, I heard her sprinting to the car, the engine roaring to life. She was coming after me. I floored it, speeding through the winding streets, headlights cutting through the thickening dusk. She was right behind me, her car barely inches from my bumper. The beams of her headlights flooded my mirrors, blinding me. My pulse raced as I swerved down a side street, praying she wouldn't follow. But she did. Every turn I took, she was right there, relentless. I could see her face now in the reflection of her headlights, contorted, unhinged. It was like she was enjoying this chase. Her faint giggles reached my ears as I raked my brain for possible escape. And just when I thought there was none, I spotted it. A narrow alleyway up ahead, just wide enough for my truck. Without thinking, I veered into it, scraping the sides of the vehicle as I barreled through. Her car wouldn't fit. I hoped it would slow her down. I parked in the shadows, killing the engine, holding my breath. Everything was silent for a moment. Then I heard it, the crunch of gravel, the slow roll of tires. She was circling the block, looking for me. My hands shook as I clutched the steering wheel, sweat dripping down my face. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, each thud louder than the last. I watched her car crawl past the alley, her headlights sweeping across the entrance. She had lost me, hopefully forever. The lockdown alarm blared through the school, yanking me out of my daydream. I'd been staring at the clock during history class and slept, but the alarms went off. At first, we all assumed it was another drill, but something felt different. The tone of the announcement over the intercom was frantic, the principal's voice cracking with fear. My heart pounded as Mrs. Reynolds clicked the classroom door shut and turned the lock. She motioned for us to get under our desks, the lights already off. Whispers spread across the room like wildfire, but I stayed silent, my breath caught in my throat. The only thought racing through my mind was Jake, my twin brother. Jake wasn't there. He'd skipped school again. Lately, he had been skipping more and more, avoiding PE class ever since Mr. Grady had started singling him out. Jake had always been an easy target for bullies, but Mr. Grady never helped. If anything, he encouraged it, made Jake the punchline of his jokes. But I was just relieved. Jake wasn't there. At least he was safe. The minutes dragged on, tension mounting with every second. We could hear footsteps in the hallway, faint but deliberate. Mrs. Reynolds stood near the door, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the handle as though it might turn at any moment. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a gunshot rang out. The room froze. I felt my stomach drop, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Another shot, louder, closer this time. Screams echoed from down the hall, and then nothing. Just silence. Mrs. Reynolds whispered for us to stay calm, her voice trembling.
It's going to be okay,
she said, but we all knew it wasn't. Not when someone was out there, armed, and we were sitting ducks. The intercom crackled to life, startling us all. A distorted voice echoed through the speakers. "The dean fulfills my demands or I start killing hostages." My stomach lurched. Hostages? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who could be doing this? The principal's announced, locked in his office, that he doesn't negotiate with terrorists. A cold, cruel voice came back over the intercom. 5 students in room 306. I'll give you 10 minutes. 306. Biology. My heart sank. My crush, my love Emily had that class. Mrs. Reynolds didn't hesitate. Now certain about where the shooter was, she gestured for us to follow her to the back door, which led into a maintenance hallway. It was our only chance. I moved with the others, my heart pounding. We slipped out, moving in tense silence, but as we reached the stairwell, more gunshots rang out. Close, too close. A bullet shattered the window next to me. Mrs. Reynolds screamed, dragging one of the students down, but we were pinned, close to room 306. We heard sirens. The shooter was likely shooting out from the window at the cops. Something happened to me just then. I leapt out and ran the other way, only halting as I arrived at room 306 and glanced carefully through the glass at the door. My heart sank. Emily was there, tied up along with 5 other students. The shooter was hiding beside the window, taking shots outside. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't leave her. I had to do something for Emily. I crept into the maintenance room next to the supply closet. It connected to room 306 through a small storage hatch. My heart pounded in my ears as I pulled a wrench from a shelf, gripping it tightly. I edged closer to the door, my breath shallow. Peeking through the crack, I saw the shooter, his back turned to me, his gun aimed at outside at the cops. In one swift motion, I opened the door and swung the wrench as hard as I could. It connected with a sickening thud, and the shooter crumpled to the floor, the gun slipping from his hand. I dropped the wrench, my hands trembling as I knelt beside him. Blood pooled around his head, and he fell unconscious. The hostages rushed out screaming, and the police charged in. I stood in shock, my fingers fumbling to pull off his mask. That's when my heart stopped. The face staring back at me was Jake, my twin brother. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. How? Why? He wasn't supposed to be here. He couldn't be the shooter. But there he was, unconscious, the gun beside him. The police burst into the room seconds later, dragging Jake away, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Later, they told me what happened. Jake had been pushed too far, tormented until he snapped. He'd planned this, skipping school to avoid suspicion, returning with a gun to target Mr. Grady, the man who had made his life a living hell. But it had spiraled out of control when he couldn't get to Grady. I stopped the shooter, but the price was too high. I had saved them, only to find out the person behind the mask was my own brother. I'd always prefer her over you. I'd burn for her. I had overheard my son Jason yelling in the garage just before he pulled the car out. I still remember the way it had all begun, quiet and peaceful, but ominous in hindsight. Our family piled into the car for our yearly visit to Myuu, my husband's grave. It was Jason, his wife Lisa, their twins, and of course, Jules. Jules had been the kids' caregiver for about a year, helping out around the house. She had become family, the daughter I never had. Jason insisted Jules sit in the front with him, leaving Lisa to tend to the kids in the back. I noticed the way Lisa stiffened, her eyes darkening for just a moment before she forced a polite smile. That was Lisa, always composed, putting my son before herself, even when something ate her away. But there was no hiding the tension that hung in the air, thick and stifling. I should have said something, anything, but I chose silence, and that was my worst mistake. At the cemetery, the day stretched long and dull as we cleaned the grave. The kids ran around, laughing, while Jules helped with the cleaning, always staying close to Lisa and closer to Jason. I noticed, and so did Lisa. I caught her watching them when she thought no one was looking. Her hands gripped the gardening shears so tightly that her knuckles turned white, while Jason, oblivious or maybe indifferent, chatted away with Jules like it was just another day. Little did we know, it wasn't. The ride back home was silent, save for the occasional giggles from the kids. Lisa stared out the window, pale like a ghost. Jason was unusually quiet too, but his actions screamed betrayal. The casual brush against Jules's thigh as he shifted gears, the stolen glances, the shy smiles. That evening, after dinner, I kissed the kids goodnight and waved Jason and Lisa off to bed. The unease in Lisa's eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. Jason, on the other hand, seemed carefree, already a bit tipsy from the wine he'd downed after dinner. And Jules? She lingered, helping tidy up the kitchen before heading home. Too helpful, too involved. Everything in the air was wrong, but once again I remained quiet as I slipped into my bed. I must have fallen asleep at around midnight, but my dreams were restless, haunted by images I couldn't quite grasp. Then it happened. A scream ripped through my slumber, yanking me from a nightmare, only to push me into another. For a moment, I thought it was still dreaming, until the smell of smoke hit me, thick and suffocating. I sprinted down the hall, my heart pounding in my chest. The kids were already outside crying, surrounded by neighbors who had rushed to help. The house was bathed in orange. Flames licked at the walls, devouring everything in their path. But it wasn't the crackling of the fire or the roar of the flames that chilled me to my core. It was the screams, raw, agonizing, coming from inside. My children's voices, Jason and Lisa, were trapped inside, burning alive. I can still feel the way I fought to get them, my legs like lead. My body lurched forward with every desperate breath. Neighbors held me back as I thrashed, screamed for Jason, for Lisa.
Let me go! They're gonna die!
My voice was broken, hoarse from the smoke and the terror that gripped my chest. Hot tears cut through the soot on my face as I begged, but their grip only tightened. The fire roared louder, and all I could do was watch. Soon, siren wailed. The fire trucks arrived, but it was already too late. When they pulled Lisa out, her body was barely recognizable, charred beneath layers of blackened skin. But she was alive, just barely breathing. Alive. But my Jason didn't make it. The flames had consumed him, leaving only ash. At first, they said it was an electrical fire, faulty wiring, they assumed. It made sense with an old house like ours. Fires like that happen all the time. Investigators nodded and scribbled in their little notepads, shaking their heads like it was just a sad, tragic accident. But I knew it wasn't, not even close. A week later, when Lisa finally woke up in the hospital, her voice was raspy and weak, but her words, they were chillingly clear. She had discovered Jason's affair with Jules, found texts and voicemails laid out before her like a death sentence. That day at the cemetery, she'd simmered in her own rage, quietly plotting. She had waited for Jason to pass out, drunk and oblivious, after they had the argument. He confessed, thinking she would forgive him like always, but this time Lisa didn't forgive. She started the fire, watching as it spread as Jason slept through the beginning of the flames. She wanted it to look like an accident, the thought that something like this could hide behind her calm demeanor, her steady hands. It's terrifying. What kind of darkness had she been carrying all this time? Why didn't she reach out? As they wheeled Lisa away from the police, I stood there, staring at the empty shell of our home, at the blackened remains where my son had died. Could I have stopped it? Could I have said something? Done something? I replayed every moment, every glance, every conversation. If I had spoken up, if I had confronted Jason, if I had taken Lisa aside. But now, it was too late. My silence had cost me everything I owned. I still hear the crackling of the flames in my dreams, and sometimes, if I listen close enough, I can still hear Lisa's scream mingling with the roar of the fire. It wasn't the scream of a woman in pain. It was the scream of someone who had finally snapped. We drove for hours, the five of us, Ryan, Jessica, Mark, Lisa, and I. We'd seen a YouTube documentary about the infamous Suicide Lake by a quaint town. They said the lake was cursed. It drew people who were struggling into its arms. But we were there for the rare salmon rumored to thrive in its depths, which grew thrice in size of normal fishes and bled black blood. "Come on, it's just a lake," Ryan laughed as we arrived. "What's the worst that could happen?" I stepped out, the crisp air biting at my skin, but my curiosity was piqued. The lake stretched before us, its crystal clear waters reflecting the emerging stars. We set up our gear on the wooden dock before hopping into a rowing boat that was standing there and headed in. As we cast our lines, I felt a strange thing move from under us, in the waters, but I didn't think much of it. Hours passed and we began to catch salmon, each one bigger than the last. Then, Mark, bursting with excitement, shouted, "I got something big!" He reeled in his line, but it was too much. The other boys joined him as well and pulled, but confusion replaced our excitement. The line felt heavier for any fish.
What the hell is that?
The boys hoisted the weight out of the water and we froze. It wasn't a fish. It was a hand, pale, bloated, and eerily still.
Drop it! Get it back in the water!
Mark stumbled backward, the hand slipping from his grasp and splashing back into the lake. Panic rippled through us.
Let's get out of here. I don't feel good.
No, we need to know what's going on. There's gotta be more down there. Before I could respond, the water around us began to bubble and churn, as if something stirred beneath.
We scrambled into the boat. I picked up the oars, my hands shaking as I rowed frantically toward shore. Others jumped as well. As we reached the middle of the lake, I glanced back and my blood ran cold. A figure was swimming toward us at a high speed, its head barely above the water. Its long hair floated like tendrils, and its dark, endless eyes were fixed on us.
Faster!
I screamed. Mark and Ryan paddled harder, but the figure kept pace.
What the hell is that?
I noticed the figure's features. They were hauntingly familiar. It looked like Jessica, but twisted, its mouth stretching into a malicious grin. But then, everything went silent. Suddenly, Lisa screamed. I whipped around to see the figure had vanished, but the water churned violently beneath us. The boat rocked and I lost my balance, splashing into the frigid water. I gasped, the cold enveloping me, and my heart raced as something brushed against my leg. I kicked wildly, breaking the surface, and spotted the boat rocking dangerously. As I reached for the edge, hands erupted from the water, gripping my arms and dragging me down.
No!
As I was pulled under, darkness surrounded me, but just before everything faded to black, I heard voices calling out to me from the depths, like an echo. Join us. Suddenly, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me up. Ryan had jumped in. We kicked hard, struggling towards our boat, and just as we reached for the side, something surged beneath me. The water erupted in a frothy splash, and I felt a tug pulling me back down.
No!
I shouted, my fingers brushing against the edge of the boat as I was dragged under again. As I descended into darkness, a hand shot out from below, clutching my ankle. I looked down and gasped. It was Jessica's hand, but her face was twisted, eyes wide and unblinking. I cried, desperation clawing at my throat, but Jessica's hand wouldn't release me. Her eyes locked onto mine, pleading, yet warning. Join us. The voices echoed again, the words reverberating through the water. I fought against Jessica's grip, but the shadowy figure Drew kept pulling me, its grin stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of glistening teeth. Suddenly, just as I was about to slip under for the last time, the creature left me as 5 salmons fell from our boat. I swam furiously toward the surface. I gasped for air, the chilling waters lapping around me as I glanced back. I clung to the boat, my heart pounding. My friends pulled me up.
Throw the fish back! Throw it all back!
They followed my instructions. Scared, we looked at that creature, its face rising out of the water. But as we dumped the salmons back, it disappeared. We gave everything that we had and pulled the boat back to shore. I ran to our car, crying, and I did not wait to look back. I almost died that day, and I cannot step into water again since.
The snow had been falling heavily all afternoon, turning the rugged trail into a winding sheet of white. My friend John and I had been trekking for hours. We were deep in a forest far off the usual hiking routes, a place which was only known for its grim history. An unfortunate accident during Civil War transpired there. A unit of Confederate infantrymen were stationed there when their gunpowder caches caught fire. Many soldiers were blown up and cried in agony for hours before dying. Rumors were that you could still hear their screams in those lands. As the light faded and the sky darkened, we set up camp near a steep cliff. The wind howled through the branches, sounding almost like voices. We didn't say much as we ate, but there was something in the air that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I brushed it off, just nerves, I told myself. This place feels off, doesn't it? I glanced at him, trying to read his face. His voice was flat, but his eyes had the same weary look I'd been feeling all day. Yeah, I admitted. It's like the air's too heavy or something. Could be the altitude, or maybe we're just tired. We both tried to laugh, but it fell flat. Something wasn't right. As night fell, I found myself staring into the darkness, waiting for... what? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Eventually, exhaustion took over and I must have fallen asleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. My body jolted awake like someone had shaken me. The tent was freezing, the fire outside had long since died, and John was still snoring softly beside me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not faint, distant ones like before, but deliberate, crunching through the snow right outside the tent. I heard a soft scratching sound, not like an animal. No, this was different, like fingers trailing along the side of the tent. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam shaking as I pointed it at the fabric. Nothing. But the scratching continued as soon as I turned it off, low, methodical. I didn't dare move. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the side of the tent, like something or someone had slammed into it. I jumped, my flashlight slipping from my grasp. What the hell was that? John was awake, wide-eyed and pale. Before I could answer, the thudding came again, harder this time. The entire tent shook. I don't know, I whispered, but we need to get out of here. We grabbed our flashlights and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The snow was untouched, pristine, like no one had been there. But the sound, those footsteps, the scratching, it had to be real. I could feel it in my gut. I'm getting creeped out, man. Let's just wait it out. I nodded, even though every instinct screamed to run. A few minutes passed in an uneasy silence. Just as I began to drift off again, I felt the sudden, urgent need to pee. I didn't want to go outside, but there was no way of avoiding it. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the biting cold. I walked just a few steps from the tent, finding a spot behind a tree. Just as I was about to relieve myself, I felt a cold, icy hand on the back of my neck. I froze. It gripped me hard, pulling me backward. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the night. But there was no one there. The snow behind me was undisturbed, but I knew something strange was there. That's when the beam of my flashlight fell on the ground ahead of me, where there was a massive crevice, partly hidden by the snow. If I had taken just one more step, I would have plummeted to my death. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back to the tent. I didn't want to wake John. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I just crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to calm myself. The next morning, John was pale as a ghost. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I had the weirdest dream last night. I looked at him, my stomach nodding. I was outside the tent, wearing some old soldier's uniform, and I wasn't me. It felt like I was guarding something, or someone. I stared at him, my mouth dry. Before I could say anything, we both heard it, a distant scream of agony from deep within the trees. We sprang upon our feet and decided to leave the tent behind, preparing to rush away. But just as we emerged out, we saw clear footprints made by heavy boots, emerging from the forest cover and coming towards the face of our tent. We left that place in a hurry. I don't know what it was, but somehow I owe my life to the spirit of some dead Civil War soldier who was probably looking over me. Working the night shift at McDonald's always had an eerie quiet to it. There wasn't much action past midnight, just the occasional car pulling into the drive-thru and the lonely sounds of the highway a mile away. The McDonald's was at the edge of a small town, surrounded by a thick forest. We didn't belong there. It was like the forest wanted to swallow us up. I was the closer that night, cleaning tables while Louise handled the kitchen. Since it was a boring job, I had my earphones on, listening to some Linkin Park bangers while cleaning the tables. But soon I heard some disturbance from outside. I took out my earphones when I heard it, faint at first, like a soft shuffling just outside the window, like someone or something was moving outside. I turned toward the big window that faced the woods, but all I could see was the reflection of the empty dining area and myself. Curious, I stepped outside, the night air biting at my skin. I stared into the thick trees. The forest was still, not even a breeze moving through the branches. No animals, no wind, just dead silence. But as I turned to go back inside, I had the daylight shaken out of me. I saw it, a dark figure perched on one of the branches of the old oak tree. My breath hitched. It was hunched over, completely still, watching me from its spot high in the tree. I could barely make it out, but it was there, unmoving. I felt my chest tighten, and before I could think, I backed away toward the door. Then came a sudden, violent rustling from the tree, like something big was shifting. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my throat. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me, screaming, "Luis, you gotta come out here, man! Something is outside!" Luis was scrubbing down the fryer, barely lifting his head. "What now?" "Just come! There's something strange in the tree, I swear!" He rolled his eyes, but followed me to the front. I pointed to the oak tree outside the window, but the figure was gone. Nothing but empty branches swaying ever so slightly. "Dude, you're seeing things. It's probably an animal." "It wasn't a damn animal. It was some other thing, like one of those skinwalkers Jeremy used to talk about," I said, my voice shaking. But I couldn't explain it. Not really. He shrugged and went back to cleaning, leaving me staring at the tree. The rest of the shift was tense for me. Every creak, every little noise made me jump, but I tried to push it down, convincing myself that I was just tired. By the time we finished, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Luis walked ahead, and I fumbled with my keys as we reached my car. Just as I slid into the driver's seat, Luis stopped dead in his tracks. "Hold up. Who's that?" I froze, looking up. He was staring off into the forest, past the dim glow of the lights, toward the edge where the trees loomed. "What do you mean? There's no one there." "He's right there, man, standing by the trees. He's waving?" I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. There was nobody there. I strained my eyes, but all I saw were the trees, thick and unmoving in the darkness. "Luis, there's no one there. He just... Wait, where did he go?" Before I could respond, the tree branches above the car began to shake violently, as if something huge was thrashing through them. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. "What the hell is that? We need to go, now!" I started the car as Louise jumped in, but before I could shift into drive, something landed on the roof with a sickening thud. The entire car rocked, the metal groaning under the weight of whatever had dropped on us. Louise screamed. My chest tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. What the hell was that? Luis was frozen, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the dashboard. "Just drive. Drive!" I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching as we tore out. We didn't speak the entire drive back, my hands shaking the whole time. The next morning, we went back to check the security footage, half expecting to see something, anything that would make sense of the night. We fast-forwarded through the hours, but the cameras didn't show anything. No figures, no rustling trees, just empty footage. But as we walked back to the car, my stomach dropped. The roof of the car, there were claw marks, deep, jagged scratches etched across the roof, like something had tried to tear its way inside. I swallowed hard, and that's when I noticed something wedged into the window frame. A note, scrawled in smudged, shaky letters. "We watching." A year after our dad's death, I stood on the pier with my brother Noah. We had spent many summers there, going on fishing trips with Dad. But last year, he went alone and never returned. His boat was intact, so was his gear, but he just vanished, never to be seen again. "Do you think it's still there?" "Do you mean the fishing spot?" "No, the rod. The one Dad lost that summer." My heart sank. "You really think it's still somewhere there?" "Why not? Let's check." Reluctantly, I followed him to the rocky shore, feeling a chill as I watched the waves lap at the stones. We crept forward for about an hour, the slick rocks beneath our feet slippery, but curiosity kept us going. "Look!" Noah bent down, gripping a tangle of seaweed. "There's something!" My heart raced as I squinted. Sticking out of the green mass was the unmistakable handle of a fishing rod.
Together, we pulled, and with a final tug, the rod broke free, revealing its length and something shiny. It's baited. Dad hated removing baits. We pulled, but it was stuck. A fish was probably caught in it. Figuring it was Dad's last catch, we pulled harder, and suddenly the rod came up, along with something else. My stomach dropped. Attached to the rod was a bloated, lifeless body. I stumbled back, panic rising in my throat. Noah dropped the rod, eyes wide. "What the hell is that?" Before we could react, a familiar voice seeped through the salty air.
"Liam, Noah, help me."
I froze, disbelief flooding my senses. No way. Is that Dad? He's still there. We have to help him. No, it can't be. I shouted, fear bubbling up. But Noah didn't listen. He stepped closer. He needs us, Liam. We can't leave him. Listen, it sounds wrong. We need to get out of here. But my words fell on deaf ears. The voice grew more insistent.
"Help me. I'm trapped."
I felt the sand shift under my feet as the sea came alive. Noah, this isn't safe. But he was already stepping forward. Noah, stop! I lunged, fear gripping me as I saw the waves swirling around him as he went deeper into the water. Dad needs me! Suddenly, the voice twisted, becoming something darker, filled with a sinister edge that sent chills down my spine. The water bubbled as a dark shape began to arise, something ancient and horrifying. Get away from the water! I slapped him hard across the face, and he blinked, confusion replacing the trance. What's happening? It's not Dad, it's something else. The voice roared. The waves suddenly grew taller, and I saw the creature's grotesque form just beneath the surface. The sand crumbled beneath us, and it became hard to pull ourselves back to the shore. Come on! I screamed. What is that thing? I didn't have time to answer. I pulled him back as the creature surged forth, revealing a mass of scales and teeth and insatiable hunger in its red eyes. Could it be Dad? It's lying! It's trying to take you! In that moment, I knew what we were up against. A siren, a creature luring us with false voices, an enchanting yet lethal creature the sailors of our fishing town had warned for many years. Sirens were often depicted as beautiful women with irresistible voices. They lured sailors by mimicking their loved ones, only to reveal their sinister nature. Noah! I yelled again, pulling him toward the shore, but the tides pulled harder, and Noah was still entranced. With a roar, the creature surged forth, revealing his true monstrous form. Noah, we need to go now! What if it really is Dad? I reached for him. The waves surged, dragging us under. The creature's voice echoed in my mind, layered with sinister laughter, and that is when the seawater took over us. That is when I felt a cold grip on my ankle. My pulse quickened. This was the last straw. As I struggled, the water pulled me down, swirling around my legs like grasping hands. I fought back, but it felt like swimming through the sand. A knee-length seawater was suddenly many feet deep. I looked back and saw the creature, its form grotesque, an amalgamation of fish and human, its eyes glimmering with a predatory gleam. It let out a laugh that echoed in my mind, a cacophony of despair. My brother was already unconscious. The creature finally lunged towards us, its mouth wide with razor-like teeth. I pulled away, my heart racing, but the grip of the sea was relentless. It dragged me back toward the maw of the creature, the very thing I had tried to escape. That is when my feet found support of a hard rock underneath. The friction gave me hope, and I pulled myself and my brother out with everything that I could gather. We emerged on the shore, and I dragged him further in the sand just as that creature leapt out and tried to bite at his feet. But something told me that he couldn't stay on land. As I pulled my brother to safety, the creature looked at me with stillness. Then it screamed and leapt back into the water. Perhaps that is what my father meant as well. I just hope he found peace. It had been a brutal month.
Ever since James lost his job, we were barely holding it together. His new gig at the garage didn't cover the bills, and my late shifts at McDonald's left me running on fumes, but none of that could have prepared me for that. It had just been a week since I started bringing my 7-year-old to work. Isabella didn't mind, though. She loved it, especially when he was there. Kevin, the guy who played Ronald McDonald. Every time he came in, dressed in that ridiculous costume, Isabella's eyes would light up, and she'd rush over to him. He'd let her sit on his lap, play games with her, and even give her little Happy Meal toys in the Lost and Found box. But there was something about him that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just his costume, it was him. His crooked teeth and pale blue eyes never seemed to blink enough. None of his smiles reached his eyes. I told Isabella to stay away from him, but she was whipped. The night was no different. The dinner rush hit hard. I could barely hear myself think over the noise. Isabella, as always, was with Kevin, who was entertaining the kids. He cracked some joke and the kids erupted into giggles. It had to be just a second. I turned away just long enough to hand over a tray, but when I looked back, Isabella was gone, and so was Kevin. Panic surged through me like ice water. I scanned the room frantically, looking for her in the crowd of customers. Nothing.
I saw him heading out back.
One of my co-workers muttered. My heart slammed against my chest as I shoved open the back door. The alley yawned before me, dim and cold.
Bella?
I yelled, running like a woman gone mad. Silence. She wasn't in sight.
Bella!
I cried again. Then I heard it. A quiet sobbing mingled with the soft cooing of another voice from behind the dumpster. It's all right, dear. You're all right. We don't have to tell Mommy, okay? She'd just worry unnecessarily.
Kevin?
I froze. My heart pounded against my ribs as I got closer. His words made my blood run cold, and all the fears I'd ever had about this man came to the surface. Isabella sniffled.
But what about all the blood? It's all over my dress. Mommy's going to be mad.
I rushed toward the dumpster, my mind filled with images of the worst nightmares imaginable. I rounded the corner, and there they were. Isabella sitting on Kevin's lap, her dress smeared with dark red stains. She was crying, and Kevin was holding her, his hands covered in blood. I saw red. I didn't even think. I grabbed a nearby rock and threw it at him. The force of my fear and anger drove me forward.
You sick monster!
I screamed, lunging at him, trying to pull Isabella away from him.
I knew it! You pedophile!
Kevin barely flinched as the rock hit him. His pale blue eyes looked up at me, wide and shocked, but still, that same unnerving calm. Michelle, wait! He started, but I wasn't listening.
How could you? To a 7-year-old!
I screamed, my hands shaking.
Get away from her!
At that moment, some of the employees came rushing out, drawn by the commotion. They froze, looking at the scene. The blood, Isabella crying, Kevin sitting there with the strange, unreadable expression, slowly getting angry. Follow me, Kevin snarled as he dragged me behind the dumpster. There was something small and furry lying on the ground in a pool of blood.
A raccoon?
He attacked me, Mommy. Kevin, he saved me.
I felt the world tilt beneath me. My breath caught in my throat as the reality of the situation hit me with a tidal wave of guilt. Kevin had saved my daughter. I stumbled back, my hands trembling, the rocks slipping from my grasp. My mind reeled, trying to process what I had done, what I had thought.
I didn't know.
I stammered, my voice breaking.
I thought...
Kevin's eyes softened, and he gave me that same crooked smile, the one that I had always hated. But now, it looks different, kinder somehow. It's okay, Michelle, he said quietly. I get it. I know how I look. Hideous. People think things. I felt like a fool, an absolute fool. I had judged him. I had hated him because of the way he looked, because he made me feel uneasy. And in the end, he had been the one to protect my daughter when I wasn't paying attention.
I'm sorry.
I whispered, my voice barely audible. Kevin just smiled again. No need to apologize. I'd judge me too if it were my kid. That night, as I held Isabella close, I realized how deceiving appearances could be. Sometimes the people who look the scariest can be the ones who save you, and sometimes the ugliest things are just the shadows of our own fear. I transferred to Crestmore College to escape the mess I'd made of my life. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but then I got to know about the attacks. The rumors were vague, but unsettling. A masked figure dressed as a WWE wrestler assaulting students at random. I figured it was just campus folklore, until one night, I met him. I had stayed late in the library, cramming for midterms. When I left, the campus was eerily quiet. No late-night chatter, no footsteps, just fog creeping around the manicured lawns. I was really sleepy, so I didn't even bother to check the two cute girls making out behind the bushes along the way. When I got to my dorm, the door was slightly ajar. That's when I sensed something was wrong. Did I forget to lock it? I pushed the door open cautiously, stepping into the darkness. The light switch did nothing. The power was out. The door slammed shut behind me, the bang echoing in the silence. I grabbed my phone, its weak flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I saw him. Standing ahead was a man in a Rey Mysterio mask and a grotesque grin. He wore dark, ragged clothes, but he sure scared the hell out of me. What the hell? He tilted his head like he was sizing me up, then spoke in a low, raspy voice. You've disrupted the spectrum. Before I could move, he lunged. His boot slammed into my stomach and I went flying into my desk. The air knocked from my lungs. I scrambled to get up, but he was on me fast. He twisted my arm behind my back, forcing me to the ground. You're distorting the frequencies, yeah. Help! I screamed. I elbowed him in the ribs, managing to break free. I almost got to the door, but he blocked my path and swung a sharp kick, sweeping my legs out from under me. Pain shot through my body as I hit the floor again. The guy was relentless, moving with an eerie grace, like he knew exactly how to inflict pain. He grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground. My vision blurred, my breaths ragged. His words were nonsense, but his intent wasn't. The patterns, they need to be restored. With my last bit of strength, I grabbed a pillow from the bed and shoved it into his face. He loosened his grip and I bolted for the closet, slamming the door shut behind me. My heart raced as I crouched in the dark, trying to stay quiet. Outside, I could hear him, his footsteps taunting. Hide and seek? Oh yeah, the patterns always repeat, Roy. He knew my name. How did he know my name? The door ripped open and he stood there, bathed in the dim light from the window. Without thinking, I grabbed a metal hanging rod and swung it at his head. He staggered back, giving me a chance to rush him. We collided into the bookshelf behind, books crashing to the floor. He recovered fast, grabbing me by the throat again. His grip was tight, and the edges of my vision started to fade. I thought it was over. Then suddenly, he let go. I crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. The masked man stood over me, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Oh, Martha's a-callin'. He walked out, vanishing into the foggy hallway without another word. Shaking, I locked the door and called campus security. They arrived quickly, but after a half-hearted search, they found nothing. The officer just shrugged. Probably just some kind of prank. I'm bleeding. Does it look like a prank to you? I knew what I saw. The masked man had left marks on me, bruises, scratches, and probably a broken bone. The next few days, I started asking around quietly. I found other students who had been attacked, but they were too scared to go to the authorities. A music major had been assaulted in the practice rooms, accused of silencing melodies. An art student was attacked in the studio, the masked man ranting about corrupting colors. The pattern made no sense, but the more I learned, the more it sounded like these attacks were about more than random violence. The guy had a fixation with sensory input, sound, color, energy. I had taken a new music class before dropping out in the previous semester, but when I looked for the common thread, I realized that the crazy man in mask had only targeted the students who had taken that class. I started digging into old campus records and found something strange. A year ago, there was a student group called Martha, Multimedia Arts Research and Therapeutic Healing Association. They explored the connection between art, music, and healing, but the program was shut down due to lack of funding. One student, Max, was heavily involved, who belonged to the same frat house as me. It didn't take much to put the pieces together. I inquired around and learned that he had run some kind of lab above a drug den close to campus. With a nervous heart, I entered the old abandoned multi-story, where the druggies from our college and around flocked. It was a scary experience, but I found some frat members there who bumped me in. I crossed the creepy, dirty, probably infected stairways of the place before reaching a locked room above where loud music played. I had a hunch this was it, but I was wise enough to not go and get beat up again. I went out of the house and called the cops, explaining everything. About an hour later, the cops infiltrated the drug den. It suddenly became chaos as drugged-up kids my age walked like zombies and desperately tried to run away. I kept on the lookout for Max. I had seen him once at a frat party before, so I was certain that I could recognize him, but I didn't even need to. The second-floor window was suddenly broken, and out emerged a man on the shed wearing a Rey Mysterio mask. He howled, "Martha lives forever, oh yeah!" before jumping down. I rushed ahead to find him screaming, one of his legs broken and a bone poking out. 2 cops arrived and cuffed him while he cried. As I started taking him away, he finally looked at me and realized that it was my doing. "You took my funding, yeah. You took my groundbreaking research away. You took my Nobel away. My Nobel. I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Rey Mysterio will take you down." After the police took him, I went inside to see his lab. There were Rey Mysterio posters everywhere, hundreds of buds of joints thrown around carelessly. The place was messy, but there were equipments and gadgets. Something inside him was definitely broken, and when he realized that he couldn't do anything about his research, he assumed the form of his favorite WWE star and attacked those he thought took his funding, the new music class students. The alarm blared through the school, rattling me out of a lazy slump against my locker. At first, I rolled my eyes. Another drill? Typical. The teachers love making a big deal out of their safety protocols, especially after everything in the news lately. I yawned and gave Mason a smirk. Guess they're really committed to giving us a heart attack before finals, huh? Mason gave a half-hearted chuckle, but Ashley wasn't laughing. She had that panicked look. The echo of an announcement crackled over the PA system, the dean's voice, but there was something different about it, an edge of panic, announcing that this wasn't a drill. She sounds serious. The words barely settled in when the first gunshot echoed through the hallway. It wasn't a firecracker. It wasn't a prank. It was the unmistakable, gut-wrenching sound of something terrible happening. We looked at each other, the color draining from our faces. "We need to get out of here." I knew about a hidden maintenance hallway from one of the janitors. It was a shortcut used to move cleaning supplies and avoid the chaos of the school's crowded corridors. I led my friends through the corridor, taking a sharp right at the end of the lockers, and pried open a door marked Employees Only. Mason grabbed Ashley's hand, guiding her in behind me. The air was musty, thick with the smell of bleach and floor wax. It was narrow, cramped, but at least it was away from the noise, the screaming, the shots. We moved quickly. Ashley's was crying and Mason was as freaked out as me. As we rounded a corner, the PA system crackled to life again. It wasn't the dean this time, but Mr. Higgins, his voice trembling. "We have to tell them. They deserve to know." The dean cut him off, her voice tense.
Not now.
We can't risk it. They'll panic.
They should panic! We knew this would happen! We let it happen!
I paused, holding up my hand to shush the others. We all strained to listen.
We can't discuss this now. Focus on keeping the students safe.
The intercom cut out abruptly, leaving us standing there, a heavy silence hanging in the air. I exchanged a glance with Mason. What were they talking about? Something they knew? Something about one of the students? Ashley wiped her eyes. I didn't have an answer. We pressed on, pushing through a metal door that opened into the back lot. The cold air slapped me in the face, waking me up from the daze of fear. Freedom. We made it. I turned to smile at Mason and Ashley, but that's when I saw him. A figure standing in the shadows by the fence. He stepped into the light, and I felt my stomach drop. He wore all black, a mask covering most of his face, but I could see his eyes, cold, empty. The gun in his hand hung loosely at his side. He took a step towards us, and I instinctively moved in front of Ashley. My heart hammered in my chest, my mouth dry. I knew those eyes. It was Eric. His girlfriend was sexually assaulted the previous year, but the dean and management hushed the investigation since it happened in the school premises and would bring them a bad name. Eric had dropped out shortly after, frustrated at the lack of action. "Eric, please, this is not the way to punish them." The shooter tilted his head as if considering my words. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. The distant sounds of sirens, the muffled screams, it all faded away. He took another step and I closed my eyes, waiting, but then walked away through the secret passage we had come from. I stood there, frozen, until Mason grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the gate. We ran out, Ashley sobbing, Mason breathing heavily, but my mind was somewhere else. He wasn't after the students, he was after the school. The administration that knew, that watched and did nothing. The teachers, the dean, they let it happen. They ignored the warnings, dismissed the complaints, and now this was the price. We made it to the main road, the flashing lights of police cars blinding me, the voices of officers shouting orders, a distant blur. I rushed up to the first officer and told them everything that I knew. They chased after Eric through the secret passageway as well, while we were escorted away in the back of a cruiser. Few shots were fired a few minutes later. The police got to Eric before he could do something to the dean and others. No student was harmed, but while Eric took the wrong path, somehow the system made him go there. Truly a tragedy when gentle souls are pushed down this path.